Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Cleveland Heights Public Safety and Health Committee. It is July 28th, 2026. It's 6 o'clock. I'd like to call roll for the Public and Safety Committee. Jim Posh, he's here. Joe DeWitt-Foy.
Here.
Craig Cobb.
Here.
I'd also like to let President Kuda call the attendance for the council of a whole. We'll be having a conversation part of this, so we need to make sure everybody is basically said who's here is here.
All right. I'll take a page out of your book. Tony Kuda, he's here. Craig Cobb.
He's here.
Jim Posh.
Not quite here, but getting closer.
All right. Vice President Larson.
Yo.
Okay. And Councilman Joe DeWitt-Foy.
Here.
And is anybody coming on Zoom? I guess.
I don't believe so.
Yeah. Okay.
So today we're here to better understand our urban deer populations. We're here to listen to experts so we can make data-driven decisions. We're also here to listen to the voices of our community. This is not the first time we've spoken about our deer population. This forum is like our late April 2025 public hearing. Council has had numerous public discussions regarding our deer population, but we've made no decisions on what direction we want to go, on how we may want to address, or if we even believe that this is a problem. We've surveyed our residents in 2025 and we received 834 responses. There's a 2026 survey out there, and even if you took it in 2025, it's important that we get your feedback again. So if you go to any one of the Cleveland Heights newsletters, you'll see a link there, and I've got some information on a slide I'll show you at the end of the presentation if you want to follow those directions. I believe we are a compassionate, peace-loving community. With this said, deer management is a sensitive topic some of our residents might find upsetting. Tonight, please be advised that our discussion on local deer management will include frank and detailed talk about wildlife population control, property damage, and potential lethal humane removal methods. The root cause of this and why we're here, in this era, urban deer populations increase 30% annually. We have 500 deer today. That means we'll have 1,100 deer in 4 years, more than double. Is this growth sustainable? Can our ecosystem support it? And that's what we're going to talk about today. We have two guests, and they're going to lead the discussion. First one is John Cepek. He is a wildlife ecologist at the Cleveland Metro Parks. We also have Jeffrey Westerfield here from the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. And we've heard John's presentation before. We're going to hear it again with some additional comments, I'm sure. It looks like you've updated a little bit. And it would be really wonderful if you can just take us through it.
Let me see if I can figure out the technology. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to share a lot of what, maybe that was not the right button, Jeff. Well, we're going to learn about Firefox and advertisement that's on the internet. When we get started, I have to probably apologize. I could talk for days about deer because I've been involved in this for a long time and I can't see my notes. So Jeff's going to keep me on track to make sure. But I mean, to open this up, I've worked with deer now for over 25 years. But when I was a graduate student in this area studying coyotes in the late 1990s, at the time, the National Park and the Cleveland Metro Parks, who I didn't work for at the time, had talked about managing deer. You know, and as a student trying to learn and understand, I thought, wow, that's interesting. Why are we talking about managing deer? And then I got my first wildlife job and started doing deer surveys. And I've dealt with this a lot. To acknowledge, right, we're talking about a public resource. We're talking about potentially removing it, right, and using tax dollars. So I understand it can be confusing and controversial. But based on my experience now with both federal agencies and now locally with Cleveland Metro Parks, conducting deer surveys, research, management of various types, I really think about this as an ecologist and try to understand the situation. And so I ask you to bear with me as I tell a story of how we got here. Not just what we can do, but I think as humans, we really need to understand how we got here and our involvement in this to fully understand this decision, that we all can make our decisions on what is best for your community, whether you agree with it or not. But I really want to share this story. I've been asked to do this presentation in other states at state deer workshops. So if you bear with me, It's been requested before. I'm not saying it's great. You didn't pay for it, but we'll give it a shot, okay? But I do think it's going to be helpful information. So with that, how did we get here? Why are we talking about deer? Often, as an ecologist in the park, we're not talking about beaver, but we think, what is an influential species in the landscape? And often this is the answer, right? The most influential species is the beaver. It changes the landscape. Obviously, it can flood, it can change, nature's engineer. But if we look at Seoul, South Korea in 1900, and we now look at it with almost 10 million people, or over 10 million people currently, I am going to put my money on humans as the most influential species on the landscape. And I think we need to start here. An interesting thing, and I cited this in a recent paper I was asked to write, but in ecology, in Western science, we don't put ourselves in the ecosystem. We don't think about ourselves what ecological role we play. So traditionally, we're not thinking about what our involvement in our ecosystem. We think of nature over there, we think of the city over here. So I really ask you to think about our roles and how we got here. So whether I'm asked to talk about coyotes or deer or black bears or wild turkeys in the street and how they're urbanizing, this always comes down to wildlife and people, and not just this species and what are we going to do about this species that we may have a problem with. And in my experience in doing this for a long time, we have to consider three basic points in any urban situation: that we have changed our landscape, that wildlife have adapted, and that humans continue to influence wildlife behavior. And often we don't realize this. And this is really important when we're trying to solve things and we may be blaming it on an animal. So what do I mean by humans change our landscape? So bear with me with a little natural history, but this is very, very important when we're considering today's situation. In 1803, when Ohio became a state, looking at this graphic from the Ohio Division of Wildlife, that was our natural systems, our native habitat, and the species that it supported. Ohio was primarily forested, so it looked like something like the picture on the right. And then we don't know what the numbers of our indigenous population was, but we do know that from census at the time, we added almost 5 million people in 100 years to Ohio's landscape as it was settled. And there is a direct corresponding loss of over 20 million acres of forest from human change to Ohio's landscape. And when we look at this, the result is that 85% of Ohio's forests are gone by 1883. And this is primarily because we lived off the land. We farmed, agriculture. But also at the time, our resources were looked at as infinite. They were not regulated. So people went from subsistence hunting or taking a few deer to feed their family to taking as many as they can, possibly selling them. Fur trapping was essential at the time, but it wasn't regulated. And this all took a toll on the landscape. So if we look at mammals, we can see that we lost 15 native mammal species in that 100 years to the corresponding addition of 5 million humans to our landscape. So we lost native Ohio species. This is the last date they were recorded in Ohio. So wood bison, an Ohio native species, gone by 1803. Elk, gone by 1840. Cougar, gone by 1838. Wolves disappear by 1842. Lynx by 1850. Our original native bobcat populations disappeared by 1855. Our original native black bear populations were gone by 1881. Deer became so rare that Jephthah Wade donated deer for the first Cleveland Zoo. They were a main exhibit. Can you imagine going to see white-tailed deer at the zoo today? I bet you're not. So let's acknowledge this is a significant change, right? So much, and I always like throwing this out because I do represent Cleveland Metro Parks. You can go get ice cream at the stand and read the plaque on the wall, but this was the original deer barn in the 1800s. So really interesting when we think, but think about that change in these diminishing populations. Deer, according to the Division of Wildlife Records, are gone, extirpated by 1904. They're back. I'm getting some looks, I know. But if we think about this and we think about our original populations and the changes to the landscape, they were gone for some time. This is the incredible thing we need to think about with their comeback and why we're here. So if we go from 1800 around where we became a state and 100 years later, we can see this corresponding loss of our forest, of natural habitat, and the result of this with impacts to populations, we didn't have habitat to support and humans took their toll on those wildlife species. So significant changes. If anyone ever saw Harvey Webster from the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, does a great talk on the passenger pigeon, but the most abundant bird in North America, darkened the sky for days during migration, billions of birds, humans drive to extinction by 1900, the most abundant bird in North America. So again, this is a bird, but this drove significant changes to our federal and state laws. It also drove that we established regulatory agencies at federal and state level because of the disappearance of these natural resources to begin to regulate them so that they wouldn't go extinct and we could all enjoy them and live with them. So when we look post-World War II to the second big change in Ohio from humans, we can see we now have the Forest Service, we have Ohio Division of Forestry, we're planting trees, but also people begin moving from farms into metropolitan areas. We begin to suburbanize post-World War II. So we see a lot of greening up of what used to be farms as well, or park systems acquire the land. So we see this second change from people to Ohio. So when we jump ahead to 2003, we're now more conservation minded. We have laws and agencies that help regulate wildlife. We're establishing forests and habitat. And guess what? They're back. We have deer that return. It's estimated in the 1930s, deer begin to come back into Ohio. But deer come back to a changed landscape. And this is really important when we think about ecosystems and what our picture of a natural system is. We're in a very changed system. So bear with me. But when we think about deer, and we think about deer in the original native contiguous forest of Ohio, that is not what deer return to. They now return to primarily agriculture, and agriculture is food, right? That supports a lot of deer. They do not have competition from those large herbivore species that were once existed in Ohio, elk and bison. They do not have those natural predators that they once had because wolves, cougars, and mink have not returned to Ohio. We also I ask you to just take a step back, whether you're a hunter or not, or you support hunting or not, just think about this ecologically. Humans also have played roles historically as predators of deer. We know this from our indigenous records. We know that deer are a resource. We also know that as Ohio was settled, people harvested and foraged and lived on deer. But now we can go to the store, right? So hunting is not subsistence hunting anymore. We can choose to go to the store, and we can choose that we don't even want to eat. So some people have no interest in being a hunter because they don't eat meat, right? So just bear with me, this culturally, we have changed our roles as well. And when we think about the decline of hunters, in addition to the decline of predators, this has also played a role. And when we think about hunting, this is really scary in an urban community. If you're not a hunter, you don't know anyone that's hunting, where do we get our information from, right? This is where my kids or myself, right? So when we think about hunting, and we're thinking, that sounds really scary if you don't know what we're talking about. And we may sound crazy when we talk about an urban problem. And people think maybe we're launching arrows into the sky, right? Well, that's not what modern hunting is. And I'm not here to promote it, but I think it's very important because I've acknowledged I get a lot of questions and it can be very scary if you don't know what you're talking about. But urban hunting system programs are generally archery programs from elevated stands. Usually, many people are either hunting for their food, so they know where they came from, or they're donating it. They're using modern archery equipment. That elevated stand, they're shooting downward at a target that's clearly identifiable. They're not shooting into the distance or launching arrows randomly in an urban area. And they have to go through an education program and be licensed by the Division of Wildlife. So I just ask you, I'm not promoting it or telling everybody, but just to think about when we're talking about this, try to understand what it is and what it may not be. So back to the deer story. Ohio's human population continues to grow to almost 12 million people by 2010, according to the census. But this is really fascinating when we think about human species across the landscape. 11.5 million people, almost 80% of our population, almost 9 million people, live on less than 10% of the land. So when we think about these changes to Ohio, this is the third big change from humans. We develop metropolitan areas where there's a lot of us. And that is a significant change to Ohio, and that's where we are in this system and talking about urban wildlife. And I can assure you, in my career, that humans influence wildlife, whether we want to believe it or not, I can tell you stories. You can buy me a beer sometime, but maybe in my memoirs. But I can assure you humans influence wildlife. We have many stories. But let's consider how we unintentionally influence wildlife in an urban landscape. So let's think about what Ohio looked like, or let's think about a natural, or what I would call an undeveloped system. And then let's think about an urban. And urban has many definitions, but let's call it a human-changed or developed area. Let's think about this in the context of wildlife habitat, which is any land that can be used as shelter, breeding ground, or a food source for wildlife. We have forest, or we have the new forest that was planted, but what did we do in metropolitan and urban areas? We carve it up, right? For housing communities, for parks, for light industry. And so that is a huge change to the landscape. And when we begin to carve that forest up or fragment it, we go from what looks like on the left to probably the system we're in on the right. And notice that amount of white line increases as you fragment, and that's called edge. Well, guess what species thrive in edge habitat? So as we begin to fragment systems, we increase edge, and deer thrive in it for various ecological reasons. So we're giving them not just habitat, but optimum habitat in an urban landscape. And guess what? Most species, if they can overcome their fear and the stress of us, will take advantage of safe, quiet backyards. It's what I want for my kids, right? In my yard. Well, wildlife figure it out, and there's that fawn that doe had in the backyard. And then historically, we have removed the predators, especially in these urban systems. And we also, again, think about culturally over the last 150 or 200 years, why would you hunt as you carve out a forest and you begin to build a village? You wouldn't hunt there, you'd go out into the forest. You would go out and trap into it. So a lot of our ordinances, because wildlife weren't in these communities as they developed, culturally in our ordinances didn't develop to have hunting or trapping in cities because you went somewhere else. Well, guess what? This has changed, and this is why we talk about urban hunting or urban trapping situations with wildlife, because wildlife have figured it out, and now they're here in our cities. So when we think about the human influence, the biggest thing, the biggest conflict that I have dealt with in my career, the influence, is people directly feeding wildlife. And I can explain why. And if you have a bird feeder, I'm not here to shame you. Responsible feeding for the right reasons, but when we're blatantly feeding wildlife, it changes things, and we have to realize this. But so first off, intentionally feeding certainly has its role. I'll talk more about that. But we have this unintentional feeding that goes on. So in our urban landscapes, if we think about our gardens, we think about planting, our landscaping, we think about just bird feeders. Those bird feeders, I don't think were put out for deer, right? But they figure it out, and so do a number of other species. So it's this unintentional feeding that we don't realize we provide an abundance of resources. And when we think about resource availability, deer are browsers. So that means they eat a few leaves and they move on. But if they eat all the leaves, right, they don't have anything to eat, they'll move on or they starve. What about an urban area? What if they eat your arborvitae? We just wait for that to no. We go out to the buy one, get one sale and we replant it. My wife tells me I'm a terrible wildlife ecologist, and then we go out and we go get more hostas or whatever we're going to plant. Deer continue. So my point to this, if we think about bird feeders or landscaping or gardening, we are replenishing that at a much higher rate than would naturally occur if deer ate that to the ground and moved on. And so in an urban environment is an incredible amount. Now, Dr. Taylor Redioff, I was on her committee with the University of New Hampshire, and she did research. Her first chapter was on deer reproductive research. Why is it so high in urban areas? And what she found was that deer fecundity, deer recruitment or reproduction, was almost completely disconnected from environmental drivers that would happen in normal systems. If we had a severe winter, a growing season, higher or lower rain, or acorn or mast food sources, that would drive deer populations. It's disconnected in an urban system. Because results suggest that in our region, any metropolitan region, they're not resource limited. So there's no carrying capacity. So fawns don't have that intense competitions for resource that they would in a natural system. And so this was a takeaway in documenting this. And Dr. Matt Wunsch from Kent State found that looking at deer habitat and preferred use of habitat using cameras, found that deer like herbaceous and shrubby wetlands, which is urban areas, low to moderate amounts of developed land use. So deer prefer, this is the point, that compared to a natural system, deer prefer these areas because of their resources, which is shocking because we get these questions, why are deer in my backyard? Why would they ever be there and not in the park? Well, because of these resources that we don't realize. So lawns, picnic areas, sport field are preferred areas for deer for these reasons. So let's step back and thinking about this ecologically, right? I get a lot of questions about should we feed deer? Are they going to starve during the winter? Deer, wildlife, have existed for millennia before we were ever around to even have the resources to feed them, right? They make it through the winter, and winter is a time of natural stress, right? So if you have different things going on, it connects it to what resources there are, and that influences the recruitment, or if they breed, or if they have young, based on the resources. So that's ecologically, and things have gone on like this for a while. But all of a sudden, we take those natural ecological cycles, not only do winter not become stress, we're feeding them. So they're coming out at prime health, instead of being stressed from that environment because they're stressed and not breeding more young that would stress the environment more. It's disconnected. So they come out at the highest health, having the maximum amount of young, and those young have the maximum amount of chance to survive because of these resources in urban areas. And feeding also changes wildlife behavior, and I think this is really important. It doesn't just influence their ecology and their health, it changes behavior. What happens is deer go from being wary of us, as they should be, and fleeing from us, to all of a sudden, if we can lure them in, whatever our motivations, then they begin to associate it with food, and then all of a sudden we see them standing comfortable around us, thinking of us as food. So they have no fear of us because they're used to the food. And then we get a call about this cute button buck that's walking around a park and licking people. That is not natural behavior, I can assure you. I went to school for this. And this is learned behavior. The first animal that can overcome its natural fear or that is lured into a yard because it's being fed, what is that next generation born into? A more natural environment. So we really need to consider this. And I say consider this because I hate to say this, we love wildlife and I love, when kids have interaction, but this is the sort of stuff. We're also training our children and ourselves to feed wildlife directly. And that changes behavior. So this learned behavior is also part of our culture. So enough of that, I'll get off my soapbox, but Jeff and I deal with this often with changed behavior in population because of human resources. So the results of this, I'm gonna try and play this. There we go. The results of this is I get asked to go investigate this deer situation. Those are 2 young of the year deer. They should be frightened, but they're curious about me. The most alarming part of this, and this is probably a norm in most urban areas, there's the mother, right? She should be stomping. She should be either teaching them to run away or acting defensively towards me, stomping and snorting. But they're not. They're curious and they're attracted. Somebody is feeding those deer. That is changed behavior. And this can cause risk because that cute button buck right there, all of a sudden, when it's got antlers and its hormones are up and it's territorial, the friendly deer in your backyard all of a sudden changes just instinctively, naturally, right? And then I end up on the news explaining why the friendly deer became aggressive and is disrupting a barbecue. And I used to quote this paper from where my brother lives in Colorado, that a woman walking her dog, never had a problem with deer, was gored by a buck in the fall, and it turns out because people were feeding it. Now I don't need to quote Colorado because we can now see this in Ohio headlines as deer become more and more comfortable around us. So this is the result of changing behavior, humans changing behavior of deer. So in the Cleveland Metro Parks, we developed a no feeding policy. Wildlife do not need us to feed them, and there's reasons for it, and that's why, because that'll help a lot of your situations. So bottom line is, why we have deer? Well, people have made it easy for deer, all of us. We all need to take some ownership for this. If we take a little bit of science here, some population biology, and we look at that blue line on this curve on the left, we have a few individuals, right? And then in nature, most wildlife breed surplus young, and they do that so we have this temporary pulse as that blue line grows as we move to the right, and that's because nature takes its tolls on the left. Starvation, disease, accidents, weather, hunting, predators. We see this throughout the summer as some young don't make it. But they've evolved to have enough that even with those tolls, there's enough to continue the population on. Well, what happens in an urban area, if we take away starvation, if we take away hunting, we take away predators, well, guess what? We don't have that limit. To just reinforce this point, we don't have a carrying capacity. It's not resource restricted. It's disconnected from our natural system, and the urban system and anthropogenic resources create this exponential increase of a population, as Jim mentioned when he talked about that increase over time. And look at that, now compared to the theory, let's look at Ohio's deer population. Remember, they were gone from the state up until the 30s, and when they came back, I would fail an exam if I gave this answer in wildlife class. They went to almost 750,000 deer in that period. That is incredible, but this is that unchecked population growth, non-resource limited. And this is also, if we look at suburbanization and metropolitan areas, it corresponds, that growth line corresponds with, and not just Cleveland, most metropolitan areas with many urban wildlife species, generalists that can adapt to us. So how easy have we made it for wildlife in urban areas? I do this for a number of species, but let's look at 1 square kilometer and the numbers in an undeveloped and in an urban or developed system. So the average number of white-tailed deer in a 1 square kilometer, historically, our records, and if we look at natural areas, is about 4. I feel like this is a game show, but I'm not giving out prizes, but you can guess your answer for the next part, but it's, okay, 46. And that's average. I've done surveys with much higher than that. So my point is 10 times as many deer are supported by the same amount of space in the landscapes that humans have developed. That's the takeaway point. So people have caused high densities of deer, and I want to stress this because I often get, well, we built this shopping mall and deer didn't have anywhere to live, so now they're in my backyard. Well, maybe right now, maybe you may displace some deer, but we went from 4 deer per square kilometer to 0 deer to 46 deer per square kilometer. This wasn't because somebody built a house or we had no deer. If you build it, they will come. I love that quote. This is the result, right? So this isn't local change. This is historic change and influence the population. So when we look at that change and we look at the map, those metropolitan areas, but I was told by our recent retired deer biologist that, John, you're really wrong because we really have high densities across the state now, not just in metropolitan areas. So let's talk about coyotes just briefly. And I bring this up because, well, what about the coyotes? We have coyotes now, they're predators. Well, let's talk about how easy we've made it for coyotes because I've studied coyotes my whole career. Same principles, right? A coyote is a generalist species that can adapt its diet and use the resources we provide. So we give them these food items and high nutrient. That's a lot easier than catching a bunch of squirrels, right? You just go for the high protein, high nutrient food that we put out every day. And they just have to overcome their wariness of us and maybe overcome that pet if we leave food out. But if we think about the densities, I could go on about the densities of squirrels, of rabbits, of chipmunks in our urban areas, comparable to what I'm talking about in deer. So if you're going to hunt chipmunks or you're going to hunt gray squirrels, here's an example. Gray squirrels on average, 300 per square kilometer. In one study outside of DC, 5,000. So if you're a coyote, where are you gonna go hunt squirrels? So when we ask, why are coyotes in my yard? Why aren't they in the park or the natural area? Where would you go? Because we're providing these situations. So what that means is coyotes, on average, 1 per square kilometer, 5 times as many in suburban areas. And in areas of California that we often hear about, it's situations with people feeding or the bites that occur in California with coyotes. It's because they have up to 7 times as many coyotes in those areas because we haven't learned to not let coyotes be comfortable and not feed them. But what this means ecologically is when from pictures from one of my camera studies, that's a coyote in February, right? Should be pretty hungry in the winter, walking right by a deer. This is a coyote in November, walking right by a deer. So my point to this is that coyotes now, we've changed coyote ecology, a predator ecology. What we know from working with Dr. Stan Garrett with Ohio State, on a coyote fawn survival study is that 75% of fawns survive, again, which if we went to other areas of the country, that wouldn't be that high, but because of our resources, and only 5% predation from coyotes. So they're really not playing the role of a predator. Of course, they can take down deer and they may rely on deer in other areas, but with all the other things to eat, why would they go after an adult deer when they can get pet food or go after chipmunks or squirrels, right? So what we've learned, and this is really interesting, what this is called, this is a recent study, is the predation paradox. What that means is vertebrate predators like coyote numbers increase with urbanization, but the predation rates actually decline. And that's really interesting, right? It's a predator, its numbers are increasing, but it's what it does is declining because it has this ability to flex its diet and eat crab apples in our gardens and our tomatoes and birdseed. Coyotes will eat anything. But why would you hunt live deer when there are estimated 60,000 on the side of the road that are struck by vehicles? Documented for sure over 20,000 by the Department of Transportation, but it's estimated by insurance companies there's over 60,000. So why hunt it? Why not just wait until you pick one up on the side of the road? So people cause high densities of deer in urban areas. And what are the consequences of this, of changing behavior, of influencing wildlife populations? Well, in a park system, we see this browse line as high as deer can reach. We see a loss of understory. We see a lack of forest regeneration. So the Lake Erie Allegheny Partnership for Biodiversity, which is a mouthful, LEAP, put out, I think in 2013, it's been some time, a white-tailed deer management statement. And what's interesting about this is a really diverse group of conservationists, natural resources, from the Audubon Society to Holden Arboretum to Federal Wildlife Services to Ohio Division of Wildlife. But all of these agreed on this statement, and this was 10, 15 years ago, to encourage municipalities to work with the Ohio Division of Wildlife to develop safe and effective urban deer management plans to manage the white-tailed deer populations within their city boundaries. So I reference this because this is a number of conservationists are starting to see impacts to our natural resources, forest regenerations, and other species from deer. It's not that we hate deer, but this species at high numbers has caused significant ecological consequences, enough so that this statement came out many years ago. But it's not just local, right? This was a Time article in 2012, a headline. And I hate to see deer called a pest. We may not like them at times, or raccoons, or whatever's in your garbage or in your yard, but it's not their fault. They're just reacting, right? They're reacting to this changed system we have. Nature Wars by Jim Sturba talks about this. He's not a scientist, but he references science. It's a really great book. But my point to this is not a local issue, right? And this has been going. And another interesting thing that I point out is this is when they said, this is why when we think about hunting or management in urban areas, why the rules were going to change, because now all of a sudden we have this situation in urban areas, which is very different. After nearly 50 years of wiping out many wildlife species 50 years ago, Americans are once again living close, sometimes uncomfortably so, to all kinds of feral creatures. I didn't write this. Why wildlife in the U.S. needs stronger management. So just some background. This was a study that just came out, and any state that's in blue now has either an urban deer management plan, and I commend the Division of Wildlife because Jeff put together a technical urban deer management guide many years ago when it was needed. But these are states with urban deer information. The states in orange don't have white-tailed deer, by the way. So let's just switch, and I'll wrap this up with a little bit of Cleveland Metro Parks perspective. So I'm now the wildlife ecologist. I've been here for, August 2014. But what's really interesting, and this goes back to when I was a graduate student, why are we talking about management deer, right? Managing deer. So Tom Stanley, who was the director of natural resources in 1998, did this video. I'm not going to show you the video, but it's fascinating. And it's a really good look to go back in time to see what situations did we have. So this is what he was calling a typical Cleveland Metro Parks in 1998. So if he went into the center of a forest, he went along a bridle and he went along the side of the road in a number of reservations and he documented what he saw. So this is a healthy forest. We see forest regeneration. We're seeing spring wildflowers coming up. We're seeing viburnum, dogwood, understory trees. This is what they began to see in 1998. This was really conserving. This is Bedford and Brecksville Reservation. we began to see, and this is kind of what we see today in unmanaged areas, right? But if you think about, these are our forests in the metro parks, and we have a responsibility to manage them, and then you begin to see this. This is a devastating change. What is causing this? And we realized, I wasn't there at the time, that it was attributed to deer. So we go from this to this. So this triggers we're talking in an urban situation, different situations, but this, for the ecology and conservation, this was our concern. We see hyacinth at the same time of year begin to decline and not regenerate. And then over time, we now have a number of resources that say, if deer remove the understory, right? Well, those have those effects to the understory plants, but they also have effects on small mammals that use that, on ground nesting birds, on invertebrates that need that. So these are the ecological impacts from one species, in this case, deer. So when we look at professional responsibilities in the Cleveland Metro Parks, your tax dollars go, our mission is to protect nature, connect communities, inspire conservation. Within natural resource, maintain the health and diversity of the natural resources within Park District by managing populations and endangered species and habitat and protecting functioning ecosystems. So this is why we manage deer. But I want to acknowledge this can be really confusing. And we didn't do a very good job, I don't think any of us, because we didn't know, to think about explaining this. In the 1800s, deer are an attraction at the zoo. Deer disappeared from Ohio by 1904. Cleveland Metro Parks was established in 1917. Deer returned to Ohio in the 1930s. 1941, in the Emerald Necklace, there's an article about the excitement of the first deer track. The natural resources staff, all went out to go see the first deer track, which is exciting. They were gone, right? And we thought about the disappearance of the passenger pigeon animals going extinct. Really exciting. Excitement that we could have deer in all of our reservations at one point. And then 1997, we request permission from the state to remove. We looked like we were crazy. So did the national park when they proposed this. So it's really interesting when you look at the story and think about, our role in this in an urban system, that we didn't do a very good job of explaining. And that's why I appreciate today trying to explain the story and how we got here, wherever you're at with this issue, whatever works for your community. But I have opinions like the best of us. I certainly have emotions, my wife will tell you. But really, we're looking at data and science-based decision-making. That's why I appreciate sharing the information that's out there, and that we now have publications and research to cite peer-reviewed science on some of these things. So the Cleveland Metro Parks, I'm very fortunate I have a job, but they value conservation and they value monitoring and research. So we've done for a number of years, a number of different ways of monitoring deer, figuring them out, which is challenging in urban areas. But often we're just looking at the impact. The number doesn't tell you that. There's no magic number of deer. It's what are the impacts, and are we reducing those impacts if we reduce deer? And where do we need to be? And it varies by our reservation often. But I can tell you, when we inherited Acacia Reservation and we stopped it from being a golf course, and it has beautiful oak trees, and we saw oak regeneration, that's what oak trees look like where deer can't get to them on the left after 5 years, and that's what they look like on the right. And an example of this, I asked a colleague outside of an exclosure where we're planting understory trees and protecting them to restore an area with native species. I said, hey, I'm gonna put a camera up. Could you plant a dogwood? And I just wanna monitor what deer do to it. So we planted it, and deer found it. And they're usually browsers, right? They eat a few leaves and they move on until they don't have any fear, and then they become a grazer. They ate every leaf in 6 days. So that's my point, where if we're getting paid or using tax dollars to restore back to natural habitat property require and invasive plants, deer have certainly an impact, and again, why we manage. So we reference the science, and that's why I appreciate the Metro Parks allowing me to be here at this request to share what we know, and we do this as well in workshops, and we do manage deer. I'll be clear about that. We did try contraceptives at a time. We spent almost $500,000 on contraceptives in one of our smallest reservations. And during that test, we were trying to assess feasibility and practicality of using contraceptives to manage deer. But we're also with taxpayer dollars, interested in the effort, cost, and practicality of delivering under field conditions, and is it practical and fiscally responsible? So we looked at the most isolated reservation we had because we don't have fences around our parks. They're open, and we conducted this test. And it took 1,000 hours of effort. I wasn't here for this. Actually, I was working for a different agency and actually visited this project. But it was about 10 hours per deer. The second year is about almost 12 hours, over 1,000 hours per deer. So that's the amount of hours, manpower that it takes into that. I'm sorry, staff power that it goes into that when we look at that. And that's just from our study. But the interesting takeaway is, because this isn't a closed population, and I'll explain this, is that does that were untreated with a contraceptive moved into our area that we're trying to, and treated animals left because deer move, right? So when you're investing money in these. So I was always told that you have to treat 90% of females who have young, right? So that's why we're talking about females to manage the population. So I used our numbers about a year ago. This is an update. And I looked, okay, so that's if we manage with what we know, that's managing over 10 years with contraceptives, we will see a reduction if we can get 90% of females. But if you don't get 90%, look at those numbers for 80 and 70. And you're hoping that that deer population changes over time. So for us, for Cleveland Metro Parks, the free-ranging nature of deer in the region where both immigration and emigration take place make it difficult to deliver a contraceptive. There is now surgical sterilization, but to treat enough animals and keep treating them. What we do know from our predation and fawn survival study is that we know the average home range of the deer we had collared because we were tracking them. So we looked at the average home range, and this can vary, but we looked at an average over time. So if I took Hinckley Reservation, and that's the border of Hinckley Reservation, and during an aerial infrared survey, those were the locations of deer. And those are John's deer. Let's say at that time, those are the deer that are in the park that I am tasked with, what are we going to do about deer in our park? I mapped the home range around each one of those. So this is what I mean by an open population. Those animals aren't staying there. They range over a year. They naturally move. We know that. So when we're talking about an open population, and this is a moving target when we're trying to treat 90% of a population for population reduction. So I thought I would share this for what we learned, and when we look at other reservations. When we hear about contraceptive studies and the successes sometimes with this, though it can be very expensive, often we have to realize they're on islands or they're enclosed, fenced-in federal facilities where you know how many deer you are. You can mark them, you can see these animals were treated, and they're a closed population where you're not getting untreated animals or your treated animals out. So it's just a difference. That's what I'm talking about with an open population. We are not. So Cleveland Met Parks continues to work with the Division of Wildlife, and we continue to manage deer. So with that, but it's about, for us, it's a little bit different than your community because we're looking at forest regeneration, protecting our natural resources, and we remove deer to reduce damage. I'm turning it over to Jeff. I think with our intro, I'm okay on time.
Thanks, John. So Jeff Westerfield works for ODNR, the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. And over the last year and a half, members of council and the safety committee have been going to presentations. We've been listening to this. We've seen this a number of times. Each time it's great. Thank you very much for presenting it to us. Jeff has also presented to us. And one of the prerequisites of doing any deer management plan or deer management is having a plan. And what cities do is they work with ODNR. They do a deep dive. They look at the science. They look at our numbers. They look at what's happened in neighboring communities. Jeff works with the city of South Euclid, Shaker, Beechwood. You've spoken to University Heights. You're talking to East Cleveland. You're talking to Cleveland. But ODNR has put together a draft deer management plan for council to review. And one of the things that this council is going to do is we're going to discuss that in a little bit more detail. We've had some preliminary conversations about it. This is the first time, I mean, we've seen it on paper. This is the first time Jeff has actually been here with other council members present. And you're going to talk a little bit about the plan, from what I understand.
Yeah. Thanks, Jim. So yeah, again, my name's Jeff Westerfield. I work out of our Akron office. One of my primary duties with my agency is to assist city leaders and administrators in looking at how to manage urban deer populations. So I've been at this for over 2 decades now, worked with countless communities. I spend, to my boss's dismay, more time out of Northeast Ohio than he wants me to, but I help communities throughout the state, and I've helped some other communities, even outside the state borders, address and look at their deer management situation. So what I'm going to do today, and you know, I've like Jim said, I've you know, the city of Cleveland Heights has provided me with some information. I've spent a lot of time looking at the city and looking at what the options are, and put together some management recommendations for the city to take under advisement. So what I'm going to do today is kind of give you kind of a synopsis, a summary of what those recommendations look like. And what we're going to do is kind of give a quick summary of not just, I'm going to hit on the recommendations, but I'm going to kind of touch briefly on all the options as a whole, right? So that way you understand that we've looked at not just, you know, simply the 2 or 3 things that I'll talk about, but everything as a whole. So, how I kind of tackle deer management, how I look at deer management is kind of taking a phased approach at looking at the deer management. And so there's basically 4 different phases that I kind of look at when we're looking at deer management and coming up with a plan of attack for addressing deer in an urban setting. So the first one is non-lethal. I always take a look at this one first, because at the end of the day, if we can address things to the extent possible without having to do anything, even touching the deer, that's obviously a win, right? So if I can have a small garden and we can fence around and keep those deer out of there, bingo, right? We've got a situation where now we're able to have our garden and the deer around as well. So that's a win there. But we also look at, you know, in urban areas, deer vehicle accidents, and usually that is the primer for why I start talking to a community, is that they see those deer vehicle accident numbers creep up year after year. So one of the things that you know, the city, you know, in my opinion, should do is, you know, work with me to take a look at deer crossing areas in the city. One of the things I always say is really interesting is that we're really good at putting signs up and we're really bad about taking them down. We were just on a trip, and I told my wife, I said, look, you know, the road's going to be closed January 1st to the 31st because they had the signs still up and hadn't taken it down. So, you know, I think the city, you know, can certainly benefit if the city sees the need to work with me to look at some of those deer crossing areas and assess not only where those signs are, but maybe where they aren't and where they should be. Another thing from a non-lethal side is to do education. So when we look at deer vehicle accidents, we know, and if you pay attention in the coming months, when we get into October, going into November, you're going to see the deer hit on the roadways, especially the highways, because they don't get picked up as quickly off of the highways as they do in the you know, the city limits. But is that the city should be educating you guys through the social media is a great way to just educate you guys that, hey, now's the time to be more vigilant, right? When we get to October, the first thing I tell my kids that are driving is, hey, remember, now's the time that those deer are going to be moving across roadways. Be watchful on the sides of the road. Make sure you got your high beams on, that kind of stuff, just to be mindful. Breeding season. So that's when they're breeding. So they're moving a lot more because of that. The other thing that I really focus on heavily in urban areas is addressing trees and shrubs through non-lethal by doing some type of barrier to those, keep those deer off of them. It's an unfortunate thing that we have to do, but with deer out there, if you really value those trees, you got to do something to protect them, right? And until they get to a point to where they can sustain some of the damage. So, you know, I always tell the great story. You know, I have these really awesome tamarack larch trees in my backyard. I planted them, and they're very important to me because of the habitat restoration work I'm doing. And here's Jeff talking to people day in, day out about deer management. And I look out there, last year, and I said, hey, I think I'm good. I think these deer are going to leave my trees alone this year. And then, sure enough, I go out there, in mid-October, and I'm like, Jeff, you're an idiot. Like, why did you not put the post back up around those trees? I pull them in the spring from an aesthetic standpoint to have it looking good in the spring and summer. But you'll know if you come to my place now, you're going to notice those posts are still up in place. I'm not taking them out. So, doing stuff like that to keep those deer off of those plants to essentially make sure that they have the ability to get to the point where they can sustain some damage or get above where the deer browse is. So John showed you that deer browse line. If we can get those trees above there, all is good in the world. One of the other things is that the city has at their disposal, and I'm always there. So from a recommendation standpoint, is that if the city sees a need for me to come in and give workshops, I'm always available to give workshops to residents. And so a lot of times, just talking to folks, hearing their situation, and being able to walk through the situation that they have and come up with a game plan for addressing those specific situations or that yard. That being said, we don't have to do workshops to do that. I'm a public servant, so you guys are always willing, and able to call me at any point in time, and we can chat about deer issues on your property. The other thing is to utilize the city website, right? We got the city website. You guys have a great website, has tons of information on there. Just adding some additional content about deer management on there and what you can do to help, look at some of those best management practices for dealing with deer in urban landscapes. We have some great information on our website as well, so sometimes it's just simply being able to give you a good place to point. I know when I'm looking for stuff, I go right to my municipality's website to go find it. However, the thing with non-lethal that you got to keep in mind is that non-lethal stuff is all deer damage mitigation, okay? We can do all that stuff and we can keep the deer off of our gardens, but it does nothing from a population standpoint. And as John did a great job of pointing out, deer populations can grow pretty quickly, right? So even though we're doing all that non-lethal stuff, deer populations grow, right? Does will continue to have fawns, and those fawns, usually 50%, will grow up to have more fawns in the future years. And the other thing too is it does not, address what I had mentioned, oftentimes is the primer for a lot of these cities to look at this is on the deer vehicle accident side, right? We're in the public safety committee setting. So, we can do non-lethal stuff, but we still have those deer on the landscape. They're still susceptible to getting hit by cars. And it's just a simple probabilities thing, right? The more deer we have on the landscape, the more probabilities that those deer are going to be hit by vehicles. So now what we're going to kind of focus the remaining three phases on is the lethal side of things. The first thing that we look at and the next step up is on the archery hunting. So John did a great job talking about archery hunting. You can see I kind of put the dollar signs up there. Really the hunting side of it is much like non-lethal, right? That's a lot of it's through education. You guys might have some money tied up in doing the non-lethal, but from a city side, it's just a matter of education and outreach. Hunting programs are very similar in a very minimal cost. Usually, we've surveyed municipalities all throughout Ohio on this. At max, they're looking at $1,000 a year on implementing an archery hunting program. So cost isn't a factor, and it can be done very cheaply. Here you can see this is all the municipalities in just the Cuyahoga County area here. All the ones that are shaded have some form of hunting as part of their deer management program. So this isn't a novel thing. This isn't like, oh, maybe we'll try it, right? We have plenty of municipalities that do archery hunting and do it very successfully. These hunters are required to follow statewide regulations. So every year we set up regulations for that the hunters have to follow. So they have to follow these statewide regulations. And in municipalities where we do this, I always suggest that we have a municipal issued permit as well. So basically it's an application that a hunter puts forth to the city reviews it, and if they approve it, then they issue a permit to that hunter within the municipality. And what this does is it allows for additional rules to be placed on top of the statewide rules to address hunting in that specific municipality. And so, I have templates that I provide to municipalities all the time that help them get a permit application and permit in place. The beauty of hunting programs is that the hunters take care of everything from that point forward, right? Those hunters, they harvest the deer, so they do the population reduction, they remove those deer off the landscape, and they deal with the processing, whether it be they do it themselves or they take it to a butcher. But the hunter does everything on their own. And there are plenty of venison donation programs, like John kind of pointed out, that these hunters can utilize as well. So very minimal involvement from the city administration and leadership side of things for our archery hunting. Now, and when I first started this role, like I said, well over 20 years ago, my agency was big on hunting. Like, we got to push hunting. Like, this is the thing. If we could get this going, man, we'd fix these problems, right? Well, we're all progressive, right? We always like to learn and take a look at things and make sure that that's the right path forward. And I can tell you that over the years, hunting varies from one community to the next. So when I look at a community like Pepper Pike that has a hunting program and implemented it and did a great job of reducing those deer numbers really quick, had lots of areas that could use hunting. So it's going to vary from municipality to municipality. What I can tell you is that there are definitely safe areas within Cleveland Heights, many, that hunting can occur here. But is it going to be the thing that fixes the lots of deer out there on the landscape? In Cleveland Heights, probably not. So, I'm at this point, I'm not saying that this is something the city needs to look at, but definitely should be something that still sets on that table. We take a look at, and especially if we get to a point where we got these deer numbers down, this can be the tool that can help kind of keep things toe the line, and keep things in check. So the second lethal option when we go beyond that hunting is targeted deer removal, or what's often called sharpshooting. I have plenty of programs. I have more programs up here than anywhere else in the state by leaps and bounds. And so I've got lots and lots of experience working with these programs. The state, the Division of Wildlife, doesn't do the shooting. We just do the permitting side of it. The cities, they either utilize their own staff, usually police staff, or they'll contract that work out to somebody else to do that shooting. Cities do have to budget for this, because this is, again, you see the $3 signs there. We're starting to jump up in price when we get into stuff like this. So it's not uncommon to be somewhere between, and I always use ranges because there's a lot of factors that go into what the cost per deer is, but usually somewhere towards the low end of $300-400, but you might get up into that $600 range per deer. With these programs, these targeted deer removal programs, the whole goal is to put a lot of deer on the ground as fast as possible and as short of a window as we can. So that's the goal. These are typically done in the winter months when, as John pointed out, right, you have the less limited or more limited resources than what we have in the summer and spring. Right, we got tons of green stuff out there right now. We lose that green stuff in the winter, aside from all the bird feeders and everything else that we put out there. But definitely have limited resources, so it helps in the operations to be able to get at these deer and make it to where the cost can be cheaper by getting in and out as quickly as possible. Every program that's out there, the whole goal is to get in and out and minimize the impacts to the residents. These programs use some form of highly trained marksmen that go out there and they're doing the shooting. These deer do not move from where they're standing. As Jim said, frank conversations, these deer are shot in the head most times. They drop in their tracks. They're not walking off. So in these situations, it's highly trained people that are doing this. It's obviously guns in the urban setting. So you got to have somebody that knows what they're doing and is being safe. I always say, keep in mind that any of those guys that are shooting, nobody wants to hurt anybody, right? So they're not going to make shots that they are not comfortable making. So in these situations, it isn't just Jim Bob nobody out there going gunshots, the John picture of bang, 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 right? And people shooting all over the place. These guys are taking very skilled shots at what they're doing. And just last year in the programs in Northeast Ohio, we had over 3,000 deer that were removed with targeted deer removal, no incident, and all the different programs that we have going on. So
special bullets or something? How do you keep it from getting a house?
I don't want to say special bullets, but yes, there's a lot that goes into the logistics to make sure that it's safe.
Yeah, it's definitely with ammunition that they take that into consideration, that how that round stops and what's adequate.
I think I may have 3,000 deer in my yard.
We got the place then, right? So in these programs, they can be done in much more moderately dense housing areas even. So you can see this picture on the left, that's South Euclid, for those that aren't familiar with city boundaries, but those shaded areas are the areas where they do shooting. So even in some pretty residential areas, they can get into some areas and still get deer removed. And so you can see this property here. This is a property they regularly take 10 deer or more off of each year. And you can see there's multiple houses here, very close, from back door to back door on these houses. So we can, as opposed to hunting where we're going to have a little bit of a bigger lot, this sharpshooting, this targeted deer removal, we can do in a lot more dense area, a lot easier. With this, these programs are not dictated by those statewide bag limits that I talked about with the hunting. So with this operates under a request. The city puts a request to me and says, here's how many deer we think we would like to remove this year. I review that request. We have a conversation. At the end of the day, we come to an agreed upon number, and I write a permit for that number of deer. And that's how we tackle it versus the typical statewide regulations. And so in order to determine that number, one of the things that I look at is doing population modeling. So for every program I have some population modeling that I'm looking at that I can take a look at, what we call the population index number, which isn't necessarily always the exact number of deer that are out there, but it's a number that we can use to have an understanding of how the removals are impacting deer from year to year. And so you can see in this scenario one, we can look at it and say, hey, if in 2025, we're going to remove 50 deer, we have an expectation based on what we know the recruitment is for those deer and how things are going to behave, that we're likely going to see around that 294. Bigger point is that the number is going up, right? And so we can simply say 50 is probably not enough to kind of keep this population at least in check, but ultimately hopefully going down. Whereas in scenario two, we up that number to 125. We can see it's going to have a decent impact on that deer population movement. So we can do this population modeling to take a look at how the numbers are should impact things moving forward. And we utilize data that's collected from the city to help validate this model each year. So we can say, hey, we had, for simplicity, in scenario one, we had 50 deer vehicle accidents last year. We removed 50. I bet we're going to see, probably 55 deer vehicle accidents next year. Next year we see 55. Yep, we were right? So we can use that to validate that model. And similarly for scenario two, if I say, hey, if we remove 125 deer, we're going to see, around a 70 deer reduction, off that. Then if from that 50, I should see next year, hopefully somewhere around that, 40 deer vehicle accidents. And we see that, we're spot on. We're hitting on all cylinders and making some good decisions. With these programs, I often recommend to cities that they utilize what I call call-out lists. These are lists that of residents or people that the city keeps that are willing to take those deer. So one of the big costs when we look at this programs, at that $3 sign is in the processing cost. So it's not uncommon to get somewhere between 75 and 100 of that is simply in the processing of that deer. So what we have found with a lot of municipalities is doing these call-out lists, there's usually plenty of residents are more than willing to take that deer meat. And so again, much like the hunter side of things, they take care of everything from that point forward. The officer calls that, or the person calls that resident, they show up, pick up that deer that night that it's shot, and then they take everything from that point forward.
Have You ever given them to food bank?
So, ta-da, next slide. So with the city of Cleveland Heights, I always recommend when we do call-out lists that we have a backup plan. If for some reason there are deer, like let's say we contacted 10 people and said, hey, we're going out tonight, we're going to shoot deer, and all of a sudden we got 30 deer, and now we've got more deer than when we had people, and getting a hold of them is now a challenge at 11 o'clock at night, new people, is to have a backup with food banks. So having an agreement with a processor and a food bank to take those excess deer that don't get utilized in those call-out lists. And there's Greater Cleveland Food Bank is a great partner and has worked with many programs to take deer meat, as has Akron Canton Regional Food Bank, Second Harvest Food Bank, taking deer. So now we're up to the fourth level, and the fourth level is that sterilization that John kind of mentioned. It's not contraceptive. It's not using drugs to make the deer not have fawns. It's physically sterilizing that female deer so it can't have fawns. You can see $5 signs here. We're really ratcheting up the dollars at this point. When the city start thinking about this, we really got to budget monies for that operation. You women always want to go after us males. No, so we do the females, right? The females drive the population. Oh, she asked, what about doing males? Why not just do males, right? One male can service lots of females.
I've been outdoor field versus a neutering. It's like a 5-minute.
But you have to get all the males. It only takes one to impregnate multiple, yeah.
So I'll show you a slide here that kind of highlights why that is not good. But yeah, so the females drive the population. So because one male can service all those females, if we miss a male, now you've got the many females getting bred from that one male. So that's why the focus is on the females. There has been work done on males. There's a program out on Long Island that does males, but then we're back to, remember John had that slide up there about the island scenario? Different story when we're dealing with that versus Cleveland Heights. So when we look at sterilization, we will only permit it when it's coupled with some type of lethal action, right? So either it's coupled with a hunting program and or a targeted deer removal program. So when we do this, and this is again highlighting back on South Euclid, and I use South Euclid because we spent really 4 years doing a research project, and I shouldn't say doing because it was just us permitting the research. It was another entity doing the research, but looking at sterilization coupled with lethal control. So they do targeted deer removal in South Euclid coupled with that sterilization. So what we did is we focused the efforts of that sterilization. So again, like I said, with that targeted deer removal, we can do it in a little more densely housed areas. Now the sterilization, we can go even denser. So we can get into those even more dense areas. So we prioritize the sterilization in those higher density areas and supplement with shooting in those areas. So it's still going on. We're using both in those areas. But then those other areas where we have access to those deer and we're utilizing the targeted deer removal, that's our priority in those areas and supplementing with the sterilization in there. So we just simply focus our efforts where it's best spent and trying to, again, minimize the amount of dollars that we have to throw at this as well as the time. So when we do surgical sterilization, let me go back. So with that, these deer are captured and they're brought in and they're sterilized. An ovarectomy is done to make it so that that deer cannot have fawns anymore. It's permanent on that female deer. So once it's done, she's done. With that, they have to follow very strict protocols that we lay out for these programs because there's a lot of things that go into doing these. And one of them, so with these programs, they utilize darts that have drugs that immobilize that deer. So the drugs are simply to get the deer so it's on the ground so that you can pick it up, take it to where that area set up to do the surgery. The vet can do the surgery and get her released back out. So with those deer, we ear tag all of those deer. That's one of the requirements because those drugs that are in there are not fit for human consumption. And we see deer hit on the roadways all the time. People can claim those deer. And again, we have those hunting programs that are out there as well. So, right, if a hunter's out there and shoots one of these deer that's been drugged, I don't want them eating drugs that is not safe for them. So they have to ear tag these deer. The other thing that does is allows that deer to be tagged so we don't have to dart her again, right? If she doesn't have tags, then we got to keep hitting her. And then we hit her and we get her on the ground and go, oh, we already did the work. She's got more drugs in her, right? More stress. And we're putting that deer through things that really we don't have to. So even though it has tags, it's kind of the, better of the two evils, I guess. Don't be thinking that because this kind of falls in that kind of non-lethal side of things, even though it's coupled with lethal. So I kind of put it in that bank of lethal, kind of a hybrid of that lethal, non-lethal. Don't be fooled that there isn't risk here, right? Every time you go to the hospital and you get a surgery done, what do they make you do? You gotta sign a waiver, right? I may kill you. You may not go back home. So, this is no different, right? We're doing surgery. This deer is getting darted with drugs. Anytime you do that, there's inherent risks. So there are situations where the deer has adverse reaction to the drugs. There are situations where that dart may not hit where we intended, and they may get injuries out of that, and we have to put them down from that. There may be situations where everything went great with the surgery, right? And we go to put it back out there in landscape. We typically will give it reversal drugs to get that deer up and going again as quickly as possible. And when we do that, again, can have adverse reactions to those drugs and not get up and going again. Yes.
One thing that hasn't been talked about at all that I think is really crucial, very important, is that deer are carriers of ticks. And the reason we have an increase in Lyme disease, an exponential increase in Lyme disease, is because of the deer population.
So we could remove every single deer off the landscape today, and guess what? You still have ticks. So deer are only a simple host of the ticks, much like we are.
They are the reason that Lyme disease has exponentially, they are.
It's actually,
It's been shown scientifically that they are.
so they are a component of it, but they are not the reason, right? It's the parameciscus, the white-footed mouse, that is the main culprit there. Because you have situations where those white-footed mice and the deer act in similar areas, then you have a lot of transmission going back and forth. But a raccoon can be the same host just as a human being, just as a dog. Dogs obviously get Lyme disease, cats get Lyme disease. So they're all hosts. So we could take deer off the landscape today. The ticks are there. We're not fixing the problem. So I always say to a city that's looking at says, hey, the tick is the ticks are the issue.
Can we just let Jeff, can we just,
Let him finish, please.
She brought up ticks. This is relevant. We live in Dutchess County, New York. We never thought about ticks. We've been there almost 10 years. Think of living there now. It's infested.
Yeah.
Connecticut, same thing. Fairfield.
Right. What I'm telling you is that I don't want anybody in this room to walk out here saying if we did deer management or didn't do deer management, that if we did deer management, it's going to fix the problem, right? Now, it goes back to that probabilities, just like that deer crossing the roadway. If we reduce deer numbers, we can reduce some of the probabilities in some of those areas where those deer are congregating in those areas with those white-footed mice. So instead of having 12 deer at that deer feeder, right? The guy had 3,000 deer at his place, right? And having a lot of potential hosts in one small spot where those ticks are breeding. If we only have one or two, it's not as impactful. So it's reducing probabilities. It is a secondary benefit of doing deer management, but it should not be the primary reason why you do deer management, because at the end of the day, it's a false expectation that we're going to fix the Lyme disease issue by doing deer management. So with this sterilization, you can see this deer has ear tags. Those deer are released back on the landscape, so keep in mind that, again, sort of like that hybrid situation, this deer is still going to munch on landscaping. It's still going to cross roadways. It's still going to get hit by cars. So that doesn't reduce some of those other situations. It doesn't absolve phase one of looking at that non-lethal stuff as well.
Is that the sole reason for the ear tag, or are they used for different reasons? You take deer for all kinds of reasons, or just for that reason? I've seen deer in my area with ear tags.
Yeah, no, the ear tags are a deer that's been sterilized. Yeah.
Can I throw in a question? People seem to be.
Nope. Give me a second. I'm almost done.
Everybody's going to have a chance, even if you didn't put your name on these sheets, you will have a chance to speak.
So one of the things out of that South Euclid research that was interesting, because they had these ear tags, and it was a not part of the regular research project, but something that I took on as a sidebar, was to take a look and keep record of these ear tag deer. And so this kind of gives you a lay of the land of where those ear tag were going. And we had some of those deer, we had one of those, I shouldn't say some, we had one deer that went up 50 miles away. That's all Ashtabula County, almost up to the Pennsylvania line. Oh, the lady left. Where'd she go? That's why you can't do males, because that male went 50 miles that direction. The male that's 50 miles up there can come back down this direction, right? So, but we saw even some of those does that 16 mile, 20 mile, and 27 mile were all female deer that were moving around on the landscape. The other thing to keep in mind is that while it seems like everybody would be, hey, if we could do this by not having to kill anything, like bingo, that's the way to go, not everybody thinks down that same path. So it's not uncommon to have folks like hunters that say that are upset because they're saying, hey, I don't think that this is the right path forward. So that's something to kind of keep in mind as well. The other thing is that there are people, and I've through this project with South Euclid, have said, hey, I don't think it's right that we should be even doing this. It's very invasive. We're capturing a deer. She didn't ask for this to be done. And we're laying her on a table, putting drugs in her, we're cutting her open, removing her ovaries, and she can't have fawns, and that isn't the life that she had hoped for, right? And so that's their mentality and their thought. So just all I'm saying is that it isn't always peaches and cream at the end of the day. There are viewpoints, as much as there are viewpoints of people that say, I love deer and I hate deer, there's the similar type of viewpoints that go into even some of these other things. And I've even had plenty of people call me and say, this deer has ear tags, and I don't think that's right. That she has to go around with these big ear tags hanging in her ear, right? So I've explained why we do that, but again, that's the double-edged sword of having this as a tool. So at the end of the day, recommendations for Cleveland Heights, moving forward, is that definitely hitting on those non-lethal sides and the targeted deer removal. Those are my recommendations of where the city should go. Those are the top two things. We need to get those deer numbers reduced quickly. Targeted deer removal does that. The non-lethal, obviously doing that stuff is certainly beneficial and positive. Those are the two focuses moving forward. Again, hunting should stay on that table and be looked at some point, but right now, probably not the thing that needs to be done. And sterilization, while we could certainly maybe entertain that, I always say we need to get in there and get those numbers reduced first. And then we can take a look at that sterilization. So let's get at least 2 years down the line. And then if we're having issues getting at the numbers we need with targeted deer removal, we're not able to access certain parts of the city, then we take a look at this sterilization and maybe incorporate this. But hopefully by that point, we've gotten some of those numbers down. Again, $5 signs to $3 signs, right? We can help reduce the overall cost. I don't know about you, but I don't like paying any more tax dollars than I have to. So where my municipal leaders can save on there, I am certainly appreciative. The other thing from a recommendation is that Jim talked about that survey tool that they have. It's something that I put together for municipalities in Ohio to basically give residents an opportunity to say, hey, yeah, I have a problem with deer. I want to tell you about it. Here's what I've been experiencing. This tool allows them to do that. So we've been collecting data from the residents here using this, and I can suggest that the city continues surveying those residents and getting a handle on those issues. Also making sure to collect data. So one of the big things that I push for all the time in municipalities is the service department keeping tabs on how many deer they're picking up off the roadways. None of you want a dead, rotting deer in your front yard, right? So, but making sure that we keep data on how many of those we're picking up. It is actually a very good indicator of what that population is doing on the landscape. So continuing to keep that data, the city has been collecting that data, is continuing to do that, as well as police car crash data and that kind of stuff as well. And then the last survey data to collect is the city did do a deer herd study, looking at, where the deer and the numbers of deer that are in town is, I always say at least once every 5 years, continuing to do that. This again feeds back into that population modeling to help us make sure that our decision making on those targeted deer removal programs are the right numbers. And finally, I can't emphasize how important it is to kind of be good neighbors. All of these colored cities have deer management going on in one fashion or another. University Heights is looking at it much like Cleveland Heights. I didn't shade Cleveland Heights, and I think University Heights is maybe a touch further along, but the importance of just understanding that John showed those circles of those deer. I showed you those deer moving on the landscape, is the importance of understanding that this is about being a team player, right? And doing it as a regionalized kind of concept. Back in the day when I had just one community doing deer management, it's an uphill battle, right? They have all these outside influences, these does having fawns, those bucks moving around that are coming into their city as well. And so the more we get cities doing programs, the better it's going to be for everybody as a whole. So just emphasizing the importance of being a team player and saying, what can we do to help do our part for the deer management on the landscape there. All right, that's it.
Thanks, Jeff. I have a question for you.
Yes.
One of the things in your management plan was a number, and 200 deer. That was what your recommendation was?
Yeah, so I mean, basically taking a look at, the population survey, looking at some of the other data the city's collected. Obviously, when you're making a cake, and your first go at it is going to be your best chance. It's going to be edible. You can eat it, right? But the next time you make it, you go, hey, I need a little more sugar in it, or I need a little more vanilla in it, right? So we fine tune things as we move along. But we take, the ingredients that we have and make the best cake we can out the gate. So looking at Cleveland Heights, looking at the surveys that have been done, looking at comparatively to some other municipalities of similar layout, and what kind of popped out is that I would suggest the city look at taking 200 deer the first year. Now, that would be this winter. If the city decides not to do anything this year, right, that curve goes up, like that 200 turns into a lot more than 200 next year. So we got to get over the hump. That's always the first step, is to try to get over that hump as quick as possible to where we're having that impact, right? That scenario 1, scenario 2, right? We got to get to scenario 2 where we're seeing that decrease in the population. Otherwise, yes, we're doing something and we're making forward progress, but we're kind of spinning wheels a little bit. But yeah, that 200 is kind of where I kind of think that the city should look at.
So just, everybody's going to have it. Okay, go ahead.
There's a current estimate of the deer population in Cleveland Heights.
No.
So
in my yard.
we have the survey that the city did. That's probably the most accurate representation of what's out there. And I'm comfortable with the survey that was done because it was Wildlife Services that did the survey. They do lots of them. So I'm very comfortable with the survey they did. So yes, I mean, as best we can say, we utilize that. Now that was over a year ago, right? But I can take a look at what I expect the recruitment to be and what I see in other municipalities to have a handle on what that current is. So I think, I don't have it in front of me, but I think we were at like 430 is, I think.
When we questioned the number, because we thought the number was closer to 500, they basically said, well, this is the minimum number. This is the number that we counted. We can get that information. I printed out a whole bunch of stuff, but I did not grab that.
I'll still answer questions, but I'm going to multitask. I'm going to pull it up while
Well, there's a couple things that I just kind of like just share with you. First of all, Councilmember Larson and myself have been working with the administration on this. You may recall our former mayor was really not interested in taking this on. We've been working with Chief Administrator Michael Reese, who's here in attendance with us, sitting next to Mayor Petrus. We've also been working with Chief Britton, Police Chief Chris Britton, who's in the corner, listening in. So we're very anxious to hear everybody's thoughts on this presentation and just your sense of where this is in your mind. There is one thing I would like to say. When we did this about a year ago, there was a lot of people there that were advocating for deer management. And I'd say about 3/4 of the way along, there was a gentleman sitting in the audience and he just marched out. And I got the impression that he didn't want to speak because he was probably had a different view. I think we need to hear all views tonight. So if you have a view that maybe doesn't match with maybe the majority or whatever other people are saying, please come up and speak. I mean, we really want to hear everybody's views on this. We talked about limiting the time to 2 minutes. We have a lot of people. We have over 30 people. And we're going to start. We were supposed to end this meeting at 8. We're going to run for as long as we can. Our guests may have to leave. If you've got unanswered questions, we'll make sure that they get answered. I've not checked with Steve Barber, who is in the room behind us running this meeting. I don't know how late he can stay. Steve, if you could hear me, if you got to go, just come out and just wave, and we'll have to continue some of these conversations at another time. But let's get going on the public comment. That's why everybody's here, and I'd like to hear people. Question?
Yes, it's a simple question. So we don't have 3,000 deer in our yard, but we have a lot of deer in our yard, and they seem, in the mothers and the fawns, my wife has got to do wonderful gardens, right? So the deers and the fawns actually live in the backyard, and they seem to live in the backyard. They spend the night there. They feel very comfortable there. So if we have a sharpshooter culling program, I have a technical question about whether or not, if deer are not in the parks, but actually have got a perfectly fine life living in gardens like the ones we maintain in our neighborhood, how will they be removed? It's not a challenge. I'm just technically, I just want to know sort of how that, and that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Well, I can actually answer that. I mean, there's a couple of things that we've talked about internally with the administration, because we are doing this in partnership with the administration. I think probably the most important thing is we're interested in following a model, and this was discussed with council, take a more regional approach. We have South Euclid, Shaker, Beechwood doing this today. We think from a best practices, and instead of trying to learn some of this ourselves, is utilize some of the resources that they do and some of the policies that they do. They generally do not go on private land. If they're doing sterilization, they can, and there's an opt-out. Sterilization is still on the table. It's something that we're thinking about from our conversations, likely something in future years, which is sort of what other cities have done. But we wouldn't be going on private property and taking any deer out from people's private property. And there's also no plan to eradicate the deer. You're trying to get the deer to a point where you're at a carrying capacity. So this is a herd of deer that can still roam, but they don't, it's sustainable. Is that the word? I guess, is that the word I'm looking for? Possibly. It's a sustainable number.
I appreciate that. By the way, I'm in Campbell. Like, I don't want the deer in my yard. Okay, so can I just ask if will the deer go back into Dome Creek parks if there are other deer that have been killed in the park, which is a 1/10 of a mile away from our house? Will those deer that have been habituated to our neighbors, will they go back to the park over time?
But most likely not, because so a deer gets a home range, right? And that's their territory. So that's the area that they're gonna live in. They're not, again, John did a great job of saying they're happy hunky-dory there, right? So just because an area opened up over here doesn't mean they're gonna be like going, hey, I think I wanna go over there, right? And if they never travel over to that area to know that those deer aren't there anymore, then they never know it's even vacant in the first place. It's not like they have spider sense and realize that it's open, so.
I would just like to.
Could the citizens who have signed up?
Yeah, I think, yeah, if your name is on the list, and if it's not, we'll get to other questions.
Question before I heard the presentation?
Well, I mean, I think the whole point of having the public comment is for people to, well, let's get that, and you'll have your turn. But Councilmember Larson is going to be calling people's names, and Councilmember Joe DeWitt Foy is going to be working on a timer. We've got a timer system above the mayor's head.
And the podium.
Yeah, and we need you to come to the podium and speak so we can get your, so the people who are listening to this on Zoom and listening to the recording are able to hear. And I've been reminded, please say your name and your street, and if you live in Cleveland Heights or not.
Ready?
Ready.
First one is Laura Marks.
I am not a citizen of Cleveland Heights. I'm Laura Marks. I live at 18317 Reese Road in the city of Cleveland, where I have recently gotten them to start their deer culling investigation. And they've made contact. We had two really brilliant presentations tonight, and I really appreciate this, because if we believe that sustainability is based on data, we have a lot of data given to us, and we can move ahead without passion and rancor, with a thing that is important for the health of not just Cleveland Heights, our residents, but the planet. I'm concerned about overall health of the planet. We have four real crises that we're looking at: the climate change, biodiversity, plastics, and PFAS chemicals. And the deer population hit on two of those four. And we have to bring it down to a sustainable level. I think that was a brilliant word, Jim. So I'm here as a resource, and I'm happy to help you. Since I started this 7 years ago, I thought I would be here tonight. Thank you.
For those of you that don't know Laura, Laura's one of the founders of the Tree People. How many trees have you put in?
Oh, I don't know, 1,700 or so? Oh, and that browse line that John was talking about, those nursing does will climb the fences, the 4-foot fences, in order to nibble leaves. They're so hungry when they're nursing. But the main killer of Heights Tree People's trees are the bucks in the fall. Yep.
Yeah, Laura Lee used to live in Cleveland Heights as well. She has been a resident here for a long time. Francesca Aiello.
Hello, I'm Francesca Aiello. I reside at I've appeared to tear at 12491 Cedar Road in Cleveland Heights. I also own almost an acre of heavily landscaped property out in the country, so I am used to deer. I have a deer trail. All of my landscaping out in the country was done with deer mitigation in mind. And so while I have a deer trail, they give me no issues whatsoever. I have other hobby gardeners that I know out there, and we all practice mitigation and we coexist with the deer. I understand, though, that rural is different from a place like Cleveland Heights. But I wanted to say 15 years ago, I chose to come to Cleveland Heights because this was one of the few cities that didn't call. And I wanted to buy more property in Cleveland Heights, and this conversation started. And I'm very disappointed to be here. I never came to a city council meeting before, but I felt that I needed to speak. I chose Cleveland Heights because it was a city that I grew up seeing as valuing diversity and really being environmentally conscious. And I'm not understanding why the deer are being considered an issue at this time. You're not given vehicular collision data. And like you said, that's an easy thing to mitigate. We could lower, the speed limits. We could start doing more traffic enforcement. Cleveland Heights used to be known, if you went 5 miles over the speed limit, you got a citation. I live on Cedar Road. It's constant speeding. The ticketing is not happening. I also have seen the deer, granted, increase. Sorry, I'm running out of time, but I wanted to say I found it very concerning in the email that it said that we may have seen deer eating our vegetation. Vegetation is for wildlife. If you're planting plants outside, that is a buffet for deer. They are supposed to eat the plants. I don't know what we want to do here, but to me, this is a battle for the soul of Cleveland Heights. We used to be known as a peaceful people. And I also want to point out, I'm one of the youngest people in here. To me, I am the future, and the future wants deer. I love the deer. My neighbors like the deer. It also increases your property values. It's why I chose Cleveland Heights.
Thank you.
Lori Zaccolo.
Yes, my name's Lori Zoccolo. I live at 1617 Maple Road. I grew up, however, in very rural Columbiana County with 3 older brothers. So I know how to hunt and use a compound bow, and I would be horrible at it right now. But I can tell you that I watch all the deer because I have spent literally over $1,000 in the past year. You go past my house, I'm the dark red brick house with the Christmas lights up most of the year, and it now is nothing but a sea of fence posts and green fencing, right? My neighbor across the street from me doesn't want to speak, but she's lived on that street for 70 years, born in that house. There was not a deer on that street until approximately 10 years ago. Then there was a couple and whatever, and now we're overrun. I stand out front because I used to hunt, which is why I explained that. And I watched 3 houses, either direction and across the street. I know where those deer sleep. There are 11 distinct deer in that area. There are 2 fawns. There are, I think, 3 bucks. It may only be 2, and one's a hefty female. They're kind of hard to tell this time of year, and the rest are doe. So if you do the math, right, that's 11 deer. You do the average weight. We'll zip through that part. It comes down to that area where I live, dark red brick house, right? They eat 97 pounds of foliage per day. That's over 3,000 pounds of foliage in my area every single month. It is unsustainable. The deer are sick. They are not healthy. It is just not a good thing. They walk up and down driveways. They stand on the sidewalks. I've had to help 2 different people get out of their cars because there were so many deer in the driveway. I had a deer stare at me. I had to circle around my own yard the other day. It's just unsustainable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Larry Nowak.
Thank you very much for having this. I'm going to comment just very briefly. 30 years ago, we moved into Cleveland Heights and saw a deer once a summer. 15 years ago, we moved from Fairmount onto Edge Hill, and now I see 3 deer a day. This is not the same world that we were dealing with 30 years ago in terms of the deer population. And we're fighting a war in my yard. It is just an all-out war. I've spent $5,000 this summer already on sprays. I've cornered the market, by the way, for Irish Spring. And by the way, it doesn't work. They shove it out of the way. They're cleaner, though. Anyway, it's becoming impossible to sustain a pretty yard. Now, that's not the same thing as a natural yard, but I don't want a natural yard. I want a pretty yard, okay? And I understand those people who say, you know, I would simply like to have what was here 200 years ago, and God bless them, and more power to them. But I want the deer off of my property. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bruce Delaney.
Bruce Delaney, I live on Lincoln up in Cleveland Heights. Thank you so much for the presentations. I think they're even better than last year's presentations. I think you added some interesting information. I too spend a lot of time in my garden. I moved to Cleveland Heights 3 years ago and immediately started putting in native plant gardens. My gardens are for native bees and hummingbirds and fireflies, and also occasionally for the deer. I don't think anyone here is advocating for deer going extinct again, but I do think we need to get it under control. 3 years ago, I saw maybe a deer a day. Now when I come home in the evening, there's likely to be 3 or 4 deer in my front yard. I spend a ton of money on mitigation. I plant things specifically away from my gardens, like hostas for the deer to eat. And it's just getting worse every year. Yes, wildlife adds to the value of all of our houses, but so do the birds, so do the bees, so do lovely flower gardens. And I think the city has a responsibility to look at the scientific data that's been presented, to look at the other cities around us that are taking that scientific data and doing something. I think the worst thing that can happen is another year where nothing is done. And I understand decisions are hard. I understand you have a lot of things to look at, and I'm not urging you to rush into anything, but I'm urging you to listen to what we have to say, listen to what the experts have to say, look at what the cities around us have done, and move forward with a deer management plan, or be ready to explain to all of the people who want one why nothing is being done. And I know that you'll do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you.
David Richardson? Name and street you need to remind.
Okay. Good evening. I'm David Richardson. I live near Forest Hill Park, and I speak tonight. Well, first of all, thank you for two very cogent, lucid presentations. And I would like to ask that you consult professionals. I speak as a citizen, as a taxpayer, and as a retired hunter. Number one, as a citizen, the taxes are going up. We just got notices about real estate taxes, and I would like for any program to take very good consideration of the cost. I've done some research on various mitigation programs, and they have ranged from $667 per deer to $2,500 per deer. That is a lot of money. And if a program is to be implemented, I would strongly urge you to have a competitive bidding competition to get the most effective program to take care of the deer. The second is as a retired hunter. I have taken deer with a shotgun, with a rifle, with a handgun, and with a bow. And speaking as a hunter, any kind of mitigation program should be humane and efficient. I would suggest that bow hunting by amateurs is a disaster. I have never dropped a deer that ran less than 30 yards, and some have run 1,500 yards. Bow hunting is by exsanguination and loss of oxygen. It takes them a long time to die. A professional hunter will drop a deer, and as I have found from them, it's like turning off a light switch. These are headshots, and they are instantaneous. It's about as humane as you can get. And in case amateurs want to hunt and take part in this program, get a professional who can shoot like this. 3 shots, 100 yards, less than my fingernail. Thank you.
Bruce Narr.
Thank you.
Bruce Narr, 1361 Ardoon Street. I just want to tell you, I want to absolutely support you in calling the deer. I get it. I grew up in the generation that watched Mr. Hunter kill Bambi's mom, and I was traumatized with everybody. You know, they're cute, they're fuzzy, they're warm. I love deer. But my personal experience, I answered your survey. My backyard has a small sidewalk that's an enclosed walkway, about 8 feet, 6 feet on either side. And if you've ever come face to face with a 12-point buck staring you down, okay? And I was reading something as I was walking to my drive, down the sidewalk, and I was that close to you and me, to a buck that could have gored me. And if I hadn't, very quietly, I looked away, I didn't look him in the eyes, but he did what you said. He snorted and he pounded his feet down, and I backed away. That's something you won't forget. So there's a human side to this. I also participate in an online discussion group that's Cleveland Heights residents, and just on behalf of somebody who wrote, so apparently there's a deer somewhere that chases dogs down and chased their little girl. they were walking their dog, and it was, attacking pedestrians as they were walking along. So this isn't just about, cute, warm, and fuzzy, beautiful animals and this idealistic idea of how we can live in nature. I hope you get my point. Thank you. I just want to support you in a culling program.
Thank you.
Tom Gibson?
Hi, I'm Tom Gibson. I live at 1836 Wilton Road. I have a specific problem, but I know other people have it too. My neighbor feeds deer, has made it part of her identity, and we've got 7 deer, a couple bucks that come over every day and leave. They come from their resting place across Wilton, walk through my yard, and we have deer paths through my yard, and then they go eat several times a day. And of course, when they come through my yard, they get their appetizers and their desserts. I know there are other people in the area that feed deer too. John, what is the best way to, this is a human management question. What I noticed with your wildlife program, you have fines for people who feed deer in the metro parks. What is the best way to stop people from feeding deer?
We try with one side of our card is education and science, because sometimes people don't realize the repercussion. But then it's also to say it's important enough that we will have citations for the first and second. But the important part is to make sure that people know. It's good that people connect with nature, they understand, and if they think it's helpful. So I think that education is the first part, but then being able to follow up if there are consequences to neighbors or the community from one person's actions. That's why we have ordinances and fines for other things. So
Thank you.
Thank you. You may notice as citizens, there's much more public service announcements going out from the city to do not feed deer. It's one of those things that we think will mitigate some of the deer population issues we have. There's concern about making it illegal. There's a lot of things that are on our police officers' plates right now. And it's very hard to arrest a citizen for feeding deer. We really try to do it in a way that is like the idea of the card. This is the situation. Please don't feed the deer. So, and if anybody's listening, please don't feed the deer.
Wes Schaub?
My name is Wes Schaub. I live in the Caledonia neighborhood. Please adopt this plan. This is a huge problem. I have at least 16 trees that have been damaged or destroyed in my yard. Everything's just being eaten or ripped out of the ground. And the worst problem is you can't walk 2 feet without deer crap. It is everywhere. So please handle this problem.
Thank you.
Kai Cowell? Sorry if I mispronounced, apologize.
It's Kay Call. I live
Okay.
on Rumson Road, right up the street here. Been here for 20 years. We've lost, I don't know how many trees. I don't know, maybe 20 trees, damaged our fences. I spend on average maybe 200 a year in deer deterrent. It's gotten worse and worse and worse. They're to the point where they're eating things they never used to eat. Hollies, rhododendrons, everything and anything. Either if they're not eaten, the bucks have rubbed off, completely broken off the stems, the twigs, everything. So thank you, and I really, really hope that we do something very soon because it's only getting worse. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kyle Aldrich.
My name is Kyle Aldridge. I live at 1060 Grayton Road over in the Caledonia area. I didn't really have prepared comments, but some things that I wanted to point out. There was a discussion about deer crossing signs, and that's, I think, would be really valuable just as a simple way of raising people's level of awareness. I mean, one could actually go right across the street from my house because where Grayton intersects with Lonsdale is actually a deer crossing point. And if it's something, I don't know if there was a survey done showing different points, but if perhaps on the Mayor's Action Center, there could be an additional point for where would you like to see a deer crossing sign? That might be a way to gather information on that, just to get ideas. The other thing is I am in support of a culling program, and anything that can be done as expediently as possible is making sense to me based on all the feedback, most of the feedback that I'm hearing from people. If it can be done in such a way that food can go to people or to the local food banks, I would really appreciate that too, because I think at least there would be a benefit to the larger community from that action. It would be supplementing things that perhaps are losing supplements as of this year, like in terms of the food banks. The other thing is, this was something that really became very obvious to me from the presentation, was the actual damage. I mean, I can see it on my property. I have deer on my property personally, doesn't bother me. I don't have an issue with them for me personally, but I can see how with the exponential increase, it's gonna be a really big issue if something isn't done this year. The pictures that show the changes in the forestation at the various levels, that really hit home to me. I mean, I can see it on black walnut saplings that I have. Didn't bother me, but when I see it like in the metro parks, that's an issue. And I think if you want to communicate to people why this is an important thing from an environmental standpoint, those pictures are very impinging. So I would like to suggest that it's not just don't feed the deer. It's like, this is the picture of why not to feed the deer. This is the effect that they have on the larger environment. That would be very beneficial too. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. If we follow the model that South Euclid, Shaker, and Beechwood are doing, all their called deer are, they go through a butcher, and there's a USDA stamp on the meat, and it gets donated to homeless shelters. Not homeless shelters, but the food banks.
I had done a little bit of research on it, so I know that there are programs available, but I just think in terms of if tax dollars are going to be spent, let them be of benefit, not just to this group, but a greater group and people who may be less hungry as a result of this action. So I think that would be a benefit.
Thank you.
Catherine Darlene.
Hi, I live on Crest Road, which is the first road east of Severance Shopping Center here. And last fall, at the end of the street where the Millikan School is, one evening, there were 21 deer in the schoolyard, 21. And in my yard, I don't have a fence, so I am the easy highway for the deer. And every day, I have at least a dozen deer in my yard. And I've lived here for 41 years, and this year in the winter, there were hoof marks on my deck, which means the deer climbed 5 steps. And then, because I can't have any plants down below, in the wintertime, they ate every leaf off of 2 rose bushes that I had protected in the corner. And so far, they've come up 4 times. I don't know if it's the same deer. But the third time, I saw the deer walk up the steps, and then I came out and scared them away. But, I mean, it's really gotten bad. It's okay if they're in my yard, not really, but when they're coming up on my deck, that's pretty scary. 5 steps, that's a lot. And so I am all for this culling project.
Thank you.
Lisa Lythe.
Hi, I'm Lisa Lythe, and I live at 1567 Compton. My yard's about 3/4 of an acre, and I have a 300 square foot pond. So I have a lot of deer. I can beat you. I've had 23 in my yard at one time. I don't mind the deer because I've mitigated for them. And for the most part, I agree with Francesca. However, in the last 2 years, I think the quality of the deer has decreased. A lot of my deer have protruding iliac crests. I can see their ribs. This is male and female. And had one deer this year that was slobbering, unsteady, huffing as it walked. And I think there's some sort of disease in the herd. And if it comes down to culling, I think there should be priority on culling those deer that are not healthy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Danielle Benham.
I live at 3843 Woodbridge. I also manage the Delmore Orchard. The deer population is unhealthy. We have too many. And at this point, as I've said every time I've talked about this, we need to cull the deer. Not only do we need to cull the deer, we need to cull the deer at the highest level that the Ohio Department of Natural Resources recommends. I also believe that we need to not only cull the deer, but long-term, I think we also have to talk about sterilizations down the road. And I also believe that we have a problem with our citizens who feed the deer because our deers are unhealthy. And I do believe that we need to educate those citizens. And then we do need to look at a fine, just like a traffic fine. We need to make laws that it's illegal to bait or feed. In the hunting world, where I come from in West Michigan, and yes, I have hunted deer and I have processed them. It is illegal for me to bait the deer to come to where I want to kill them, as it is to feed your deer in your neighborhood who then do destruction in others' homes and their property. I'm asking City Council to do something. And come spring, if we have not had a culling program put into place, I'm going to ask why not. Thank you.
Thank you.
Roger Bielefeld.
Roger Bielefeld on Corridon Road. Since we're giving anecdotes, I guess my anecdote is I have lots of pollinator gardens in my yard, hostas, all kinds of things, and I see deer, and I haven't seen any damage. So that maybe I'm just lucky. Our mayor is a project manager by training, and that's his previous experience.
How do you know that, Roger?
I know that because we used to work together before I retired, and you got a new job. So I really hope that the mayor will use his influence to make sure that anything that goes forward adheres to project management standards. So we have known goals, we have milestones for the project, we have scope of the project, we have a timeline, we have expectations for, is this forever? Is this $100,000 or $200,000 a year forever? Is there an endpoint on it? How do you measure success? So all of these things that Jim is expert in, I just hope that we pair that also with any constraints we want to put on our activities and any values that we want to embrace when we carry out this, whatever we carry out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Paula, I'm sorry, I can't read your last name. Paula Embunt? E-M-B-U, Embert? All right, thank you. Catherine Eloff?
I'm Catherine Eloff. I live at 1243 Oak Ridge. Yeah, that's because I'm shorter. It's better if you don't draw attention to that, just saying. I live there. We've been there for 48 years. When we moved here in 1978, there were no deer anywhere around. It was probably 10 or 15 years later that we saw our first few. Now we have them living in our yard all the time. Our yard is about 9/10 of an acre. We're obviously just a few blocks from City Hall. I hate the creatures. I really do. I think we should start by outlawing the showing of Bambi in our community. Our neighborhood over there in Oak Ridge is pretty evenly divided between the deer lovers and the deer haters. We unfortunately have one person in the neighborhood who has a salt lick. I'm also from Michigan, a salt lick, and feeds, big bags of corn. That's just about as reprehensible as you can get. I will say that I've been challenged by a deer. I'm the crazy lady, by a buck. I'm the crazy lady that hates them, and I see no difference between having deer in your yard and having cattle in your yard. They're red meat. For those of us who grew up hunting, and I mean, it was the red meat that we got for our families. My parents were teachers, and one was a farmer, and the other was from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So we understood the value of learning how to shoot early and carefully. We dropped our deer quickly and took pride in that. I will say that they've eaten everything that's edible and a lot of things that aren't in our yard. They are so accustomed to having people around that they come within 5 feet of us. I don't welcome that. I make ugly noises at them and run after them. But being challenged by a buck in the fall was terrifying. And as I was tearing over there, I take something to make myself larger, a broom or whatever it is. And so I'm the wild woman that my neighbors see running around there trying to chase them away. And when that buck stopped and faced me and dropped his head and started pawing the earth, I also backed up as quickly as I could. But anyway, they're eating everything. They're eating the new things. They haven't eaten any of the 2 trees that Laura planted. But we keep them wrapped and we keep them in little fences so they can't get at it. What, did I go over 15 minutes? Oh, I'm sorry about that. I mean, my business is here, and I was an assistant law director in Cleveland Heights for 12 years. So anyway, I love the community, my business, my home, and another family live there. But I want them gone, and I want them gone now, and you can start the culling in our backyard. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Kirk Schmink.
Good evening. My name is Kirk Schmink. I live on Stratford Road. I actually came to this meeting expecting to be a minority voice, but that was much to my delighted surprise that I think I'm well supported. So I aggressively support the culling option. Just to recap some numbers, I believe we were estimating about 500 deer. Cleveland Heights is not that large. That ends up being about 6 times the natural carrying capacity of the land. And if we're talking about a 30% herd growth year over year, that's pretty substantial. So I echo many of the comments that I heard from my fellow residents, but I will put this back on council. It's actually quite disappointing that we're here, that this conversation seems to have been ongoing for quite some time. And I would just encourage a very expedient resolution that you have an engaged community that's looking at this. We have excellent resources that have been made available to us, so I look forward to aggressive and quick resolution. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hallie Barron. Okay. Paul Springstub.
I hope the deer lovers can try to appreciate those of us that have been in this town for decades, working on gardens, planting elaborate plantings, trees, hosta. We haven't seen our hosta got chewed up one night. It's all gone. It's outrageous. Those of us with some sort of love of those deer lovers here, try to appreciate those of us that have spent decades working on gardens. And we haven't seen a tulip in our yard since, you know what I'm talking about. But let's get this straight. We're facing a disease issue, and there's no question. The deer, the ticks do not get the pathogen from the deer. They don't get it from there. And I would urge all of you, study this, because we lived in Dutchess County. We saw that just go into, it's an absolute nightmare. You let your dog out, guess what? You better go through that dog for ticks. So I urge you, study this life cycle. The deer, the deer, actually, the adult deer particularly, host the adult black-legged tick. That tick grows off the blood of that deer, and then it travels through our yards, and it will eventually drop thousands of adult ticks require a large blood meal from mammals like white-tailed deer to complete the life cycle and reproduce. As the deer cross properties, they drop engorged female ticks, seeding new tick populations in yards and neighborhoods. And we're talking about thousands and thousands of these larvae that then get the pathogen from where? From the mice. Mice and chipmunks, actually. So deer are a crucial part of this life cycle, and we got to get rid of them.
Thank you.
Loretta Feller.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for your presentation. I appreciate the factual part of this. I live on Grandview Avenue, and I have Doan Brook at the uphill side of me and Cedar Avenue at the other side of me. And it's been a great avenue for bucks. I've seen nothing but bucks come through this season. Previously it had been does, but they're just magnificent, huge animals with large antlers, and they're stunning to see in my garden. They have deadheaded all my flowers very neatly and efficiently. I worry about them. They come down, and besides deadheading my flowers after they've bloomed, I have no problem with them, but I am afraid for their safety. And I appreciate this forum to discuss that. And I wish that, I said people are worried about their safety and their flowers. I also worry about the deer. It used to be just females that came down, but now I see nothing but large bucks in our neighborhood. So I don't know what's going on with that. And for the safety of the children and the other animals in the street, I think it would be best if they didn't come into our suburb and our neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you.
Crandall Miller. Oh, gone. Colette Epley.
I feel like I've spent all of today just going back and forth and making you move. All right. My name's Colette, and I live on Clarkson. And I heard what you said about the correlation and causation with Lyme disease. I've also heard, where'd you go? Your facts. The deer can keep my hostas. I gave up on my hostas. But for the last 22 years, my husband has been suffering with Lyme disease. It does not go away. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, fine, but it's daily pain. And it's not abstract. And I know I'm limited in time, but do know that they can have my hostas, but we can't get our health back. So I am for culling. Thank you.
Thank you.
Roger Breedlin.
My name is Roger Breedlove, and I live in the Fairfax Triangle on Fairfax Road. Thanks for your presentations. I thought that was really helpful. I made a comment earlier about the issue that perhaps the deer that are living in yards are not going to be effectively culled, that they probably won't go back. I would just like the city to try to find a solution to that particular problem with whatever you do. The reason I decided to come up here is to just point out that that my wife, one of the reasons why we live in Cleveland Heights and have not moved is because we like our gardens, we like our yard. We could move to Bracknell, we could move to another apartment building. It would make life a lot easier, but we really like the fact that we have a very nice yard. We're not allowed to put up fences around our yard. Apparently they would keep the deer out of the yard. The deer are creating property damage in our yard. My wife has got beautiful gardens in the front of the house, which she's very proud of. A lot of neighbors comment on it. We're not allowed to put up any fences in front of the house, and frankly, I wouldn't want to do that. So, and I also looked up about a year ago whether or not I could harass the deer. And as I understand it, it's against Ohio law for me to do anything to disturb the deer. So I would like to just point out to the council that there's sort of a legal bind here. It's my property, I pay my taxes, but effectively I can do nothing to solve this problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sarah Zinsmeister.
Hi, I'm Sarah Zinsmeister. I live on Princeton Road. I was not at all planning to talk today, so but thank you for encouraging alternative viewpoints. I like the deer, and I want to advocate for the deer. I understand. I've lived here my entire life. I've grown up here. Yes, we have a lot more deer than we used to. Yes, I understand that's a problem. Yes, I garden, and they do eat my plants, and it is an issue. They are, you know, I understand that there's issues with them. However, I enjoy them, and also I care about them, and I had a fawn unfortunately die in my yard this year, which was a separate terrible issue. But the mother came and mourned her fawn, and they grieve, they're sentient beings, and I really appreciate your presentations. They were very good, but I can't support calling, and I just wanted to speak up on behalf of people who maybe don't support this. So thank you.
Thank you.
This is the last one.
We have one more to go, and then we'll see if anybody else has anything else to say.
Rita Goodman.
You know what I'm going to talk about, so. Reducing the deer population can reduce Lyme disease. They are the main reproductive host for the black-legged tick, the main reproductive host. I think that's important. So they're not the ones that pass the Lyme bacteria to the ticks, but without them, you're not going to have thousands of eggs being laid, which is where they lay the eggs, on the deer, okay? By feeding on and mating on the deer. This is important, and it's important because we do have a problem with Lyme disease. It's getting worse and worse and worse all over the Northeast, Massachusetts, New York, the Northeast, and now Ohio has been added to that. We've seen Lyme disease, the incidence of Lyme disease go up. We would have to drop the deer population, the density, we'd have to drop it by 80 to 87% to see a major drop in tick numbers and human illness. And based on what you presented, it seems that you'd have to get at least 90% on the, you showed the charts. You have to sustain 90% to even make a dent in the deer population not going up, continuing to go up. And you showed those charts, right? 80%, 70% effectiveness for contraceptives, yeah, doesn't affect the population. It continues to go up. So I guess my question is, how you're going to make this decision will be very important, right? I'm still not clear on the effectiveness, the cost effectiveness of doing the contraceptive methods versus the hybrid in terms of keeping the population down going forward. It seems like the killing, the lethal method feels like whack-a-mole to me, as opposed to a more forward-looking solution. And I don't know enough about this to know, but it seems to me that's very important. Because otherwise you'd have to be doing this every single year, right?
consider that, yeah, it's permanent sterilization or if it's a treatment with contraception. But you have to realize that when you're doing those numbers, that those animals are moving and those that are reproducing at their rate. So that's where the information I shared was just looking at this comprehensively, eyes wide open versus removal immediately with some sort of legal thing. So the data's out there. I would encourage you to just consider it in plans.
Okay, thank you very much. Your presentation was so educational. I learned a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Were there any other people that didn't get a chance to speak that would like to say something? Why don't we go with you, please, Herb? Thank you. And then
I'm Dean Seek. I moved to Rydalmount Road in 1975. So I've lived in Cleveland Heights a long time. Currently, I reside at 2547 Bolton Road. Bolton backs up to a very wooded area. It's very wooded behind my next door neighbors. It was behind my place, but I cut it all down and spent $3,000 to put flowers in it. And not to mention berry box, various kinds of berries, fruit trees, all that kind of stuff, way past $3,000. And I'm really filled with gratitude tonight because 5 years ago, I contacted Lyndhurst, Beechwood, Shaker Heights, Euclid, South Euclid, to find out what they had done. I asked the former mayor to please act on the deer issue. And Jim knows, I asked him. And so I'm so happy to see this happening. It's too late for me. With all the weeds and vegetation and everything, I could afford to have somebody take care, garden and as a gardener for this area behind my yard that used to be wooded. But with the deer, what's the point? And I too, whoever said that, have had somebody come up, deer come up on my patio, pull down potted plants, etc. They're a menace, and we need to get rid of them.
thank you.
I'm Marianne Negenborn. I live on Princeton. I've been living there for over 40 years, and when we moved in, there were no deer in our neighborhood. Anyway, and I spent hundreds of dollars on replacing plants and dealing with damage. But what I really wanted, my point is, nobody has mentioned the effect on our pets. My dog we have a fenced-in backyard. She goes out there. There's deer poop laying around. I'm worried about, she likes to eat it. And so, and she's also have been confronted by and almost attacked by deer. So that's another reason why we need to call. Thank you.
Thank you. Can although mine's not on when I say this.
Hi, I'm Marcia Dawson. I live on Corridon Road. It wasn't clear to me in the presentation why the hunting, that the $1 sign hunting was not a feasible option for Cleveland Heights versus the targeted shooting.
So I think if we had had this discussion 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago, it would have been a much more feasible option. The problem is that when we look at what I would guess the areas that would get hunted can those people affect enough deer and it be spread across the city enough to get the population reduced?
Okay.
In the situation of Cleveland Heights, I don't think we can do it fast enough to make quick, meaningful impact.
I see.
So that's where I think, down the road, if we can get the numbers pulled down, then we're back that 7, 8, 9 years ago, slide it in there. Then we can that has, again, we're using the $1 sign to help get the numbers in. If we have to use either sterilization or targeted deer removal as the supplemental, then we can do that. So I have some programs that focus on the hunting first. Mentor is kind of a good example of that, where they utilize hunting in the city, and then they then take a look at, what have the hunters done, because there's a reporting mechanism there, and where have they done it, and knowing to where they need to then focus some of their efforts on the targeted deer.
I see. Now I understand. And I'll just speak very briefly on the behalf of my husband and I. We are definitely here to support the culling, just for the safety of, the deer. I've seen deer limp around, and that's nothing that you just want to kind of see, and you're wondering, where will it die? When will it die? Will the city come out and take it when it does? For our safety, like we talked about, deer feces everywhere. I have young children that live all around different houses, not my own, but in houses around ours, that they're always trying to figure out, how do we clean this up so our kids can play outside? A neighbor on Essex, I don't know that it's due to the deer, but has found ticks in his front yard, so that, they're here among us, and the deer aren't going to at least help with that. I just think there's a lot of safety issues. And then, we are also spent over $1,000 this spring just to build a 6-foot fence around our own garden. We love gardening, so we did that just because it wasn't sustainable otherwise. We're very frustrated and all for it.
Thank you. There was a hand over here too, but I see you.
I had a question for is it John?
Can I ask you to just speak in the microphone?
John.
Oh, yeah. I had a question. I was pretty amazed by the kind of hyperbolic growth of the population, like from the 60s forward. And why are we still regulating hunting to the extent that we are? How do you determine the population? Oh, this is a good population for the state. Obviously, the problems we're having here is statewide. How do you determine what is the proper population we're going to have, and why are we regulating hunting to the extent we are?
I think I'm not regulatory, so throwing my colleague under the bus, he's regulatory.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just curious. How do we determine? Is that a political thing based
Sometimes,
on? Yeah.
that's the nature of the beast. That comes into play. We take a lot of factors into play in how we look at deer management. The problem is, and I remember years ago, back pretty much close to when I started, I had a conversation with the state deer biologist, and he said, and I was asking him a question about Cuyahoga County, because we give bag limits and rules for every county. Right. And so I said, why do we not put as much effort into assessing and doing things for Cuyahoga County than we do? And he said, well, I don't have any management authority, right? There's nobody hunting in the county. Back when we go back 25 years ago, there was really very few communities that were hunting. And so we can set all the regulations we want, but if it's not being utilized, then it's meaningless. Okay. As we progress forward and we have more communities doing it, now it's become a little bit more of an impactful thing to look at and address it. Now, there's a lot that goes into deer management and bag limits and that kind of stuff, and there's a lot of social things that go into it. So we for a while had a 10 deer bag limit in Cuyahoga County, where each hunter could take 10 deer, but we didn't necessarily see that being fully utilized. And so long story short, we did away with that and tried to go in some other tactics. So there's a lot that goes into the whole regulatory side. So if we just said, hey, there's no more regulation, just shoot what you want, I don't think we would get to a spot where now the problem's solved.
Okay.
Because at the end of the, John, he kind of glossed over it pretty quick, but we have seen a decrease in the number of hunters on the in Ohio. So that's obviously a thing as well. And back when we in those 1960s and 70s, we were letting that deer herd grow because from that statewide we had ample space still to accept more deer. What we didn't maybe realize, probably nobody realized, was how adaptable these deer were going to be to these urban environments.
Right.
So as those populations grew and these deer got into these urban areas, and now it's unchecked because not only the predators are gone and all that, but the hunting is now also was removed off that for many, many decades. That population just grew unchecked, and now we're to the point where it's like, oh crap, now what do we do to kind of get it? And that's where a lot of these targeted deer removal programs has kind of been the answer to part of the answer, I guess. It's those four stages, but to get at the situation.
And to add to that, so it's a good question, and I wanted to hear the regulatory side because but the other part of that, what to Jeff's or his agency defends, if we went west of the Mississippi, how much public land do you have? So when a state agency is regulating that, 90% of Ohio is private lands. So whatever the state says, it still falls to city ordinances about discharge of a firearm or allowing hunting.
That's a big issue.
So when you're talking about state regulation of the deer herd, we also have to think that there are these restrictions on so much private land in Ohio. And historically, we didn't have deer, so it didn't make sense to have that hunting like that.
Right.
So part of this is just an evolution to see where we are now when we think.
So there may be a change.
So they could
evolving.
allow hunting or allow bag limit, but if the city's not allowing a hunter to hunt within the city limits. Right. So that's where I think there's this hybrid to think. And my point to this is wherever it fits in, a hunter may not reduce as much as a sharpshooter can because of bag limits. But hunting helps, right? Where if we lack predators and nothing else is removing.
Well, we got to be the predators.
Any hunting you can do it's just to Jeff's point, that's easier when your curve is here, that those hunters who take a few deer, than when they're up here and those few deer might not reduce that. But I think considering and being open-minded about a hunter, a human being as a predator, that person who does consume meat or donate it, I think we should be very open-minded about that when done safely and regulated. So thought I'd add.
And there's still deer season when there's only a particular time of year that you can shoot deer, right? As a hunter, correct? I mean, is there still, that's why I'm questioning if there's this issue, why do we still have those regulations? But, well, thank you.
I'd just like to make an observation when it comes to hunting and hunting in Cleveland Heights, and it's likely something that this council will consider when we're going through our decision-making process. I mean, currently there's ample public property where we don't need permission to do deer management. So we're really not looking for other areas at this point. We also have to realize we're in a very dense community, and discharging a firearm to take care of deer in their backyard, I just don't think that really is a safety thing. I think that's what we found working with our other regional partners that are doing this. I mean, it's just not healthy to have a lot of guns around. And I'm just stating the things that conversations have.
2:00 in the morning one time.
So, but also if you do something like bow and arrows, I mean, it's not a very quick process. And if you have a very gung-ho hunter living in property A, living next to someone in property B, the person in property B has to have the option to opt out of, we don't want this happening in our neighborhood, which complicates this a little bit, because there's sometimes if a deer is hit, what happens to that deer if it's taking a long time to fall? You also have that same issue with sterilization. We have Beechwood, Shaker, and South Euclid, they have opt-out programs. So if you dart a deer and it goes into someone else's property, and that person doesn't want to be a part of this, we have to give them some way of, we have to, as a city, have to have some way of respecting that. So that's either an opt-in, an opt-out, and it makes things more difficult. But those are things, I'm just mentioning this as observations of stuff that we have discussed with the city administration. And I just wanted to get that on the table.
Yeah, man, thank you. First of all, for those of you who are here for the first time, please come back. I'm really glad that you welcomed all the points of view. Councilman Posh, yes, there were 24 people that spoke in favor of calling and 2 that spoke against, but I want people to come here and speak their minds. That's very important. Council's back in session. We're here today during our vacation, but we're back in session on August 17th. We are discussing animal control in general. This is budget season coming up this fall, and we've talked about it privately. We will be speaking about it publicly. You know, we understand there are groundhogs and skunks and raccoons and possum, and that there's a larger issue beyond the deer. And I want you to know that that is something we will be discussing, and I'm encouraging you to come back and be part of that discussion. One question for, I guess, well, either of you, but Jeff, maybe. Deer have either 1, 2, or 3. Could you give us percentages? Does have, like, what's the most common? What percentage have, I believe it's twins are the most common. Is that true?
The easiest way to answer that question is year 1, they typically will have a singlet. Year 2 and beyond, it's 2. In some cases, they'll have 3. Very, very rare cases, 4. But the most common is 2. So if if you're looking at kind of what the average is, it would be 2 that what you would look at. But John kind of hit on, the health of that deer impacts that. So the healthier that deer is, the more likely they can have some additional deer. Now, sometimes we'll hear that as kind of a argument against doing some type of lethal control, because it's like, well, if you're just making them healthier, they're just going to have more fawns. Well, again, very, very rare cases are going to have 4. Like there's a limit to how many fawns that doe can have. It's just like people, right? I mean, most common is 1. Twins are not that uncommon. Every once in a while you have.
The deer on my street must be healthy because it's 2s and 3s. So I just, the last thing I'll say is I'm really for this regional approach. That's the key to the impact, and I'm really glad to hear that there are a lot of other of our neighboring communities that are either doing it or at least thinking about joining.
Does anybody else have any other? No one's.
I just wanted to make a comment. Judith Ross, Monte Vista Road. So, I've seen deer in my yard with those big tags coming from South Euclid. It's not stopping them from carrying ticks, eating everything around. So I think sterilization is not really the way to go. It may be over 50 years it would be the way to go, but it's not going to solve the problems that we're having right now with deer, because they're still going to be out there. Maybe they won't be having more babies, but there's still quite a few. They can still do the damage that is disturbing us. Thanks.
They only live 3 to 6 years.
What?
They live 3 to 6 years. That's their lifespan in the wild.
Actually,
So-
quite longer than that.
Longer because they're getting.
Because they're doing very well in urban systems.
So how long is it then?
Yeah, you call me flat-footed, but I would say there are deer in programs that have been contracepted that I've talked to colleagues that had to be removed after 13 or 14 years.
Wow. So it really increases their lifespan.
Yeah. And the other thing is an animal that's been contracepted doesn't have to go through the stress of reproduction or that energy cost and energy budget. So there's 3 to 6 years is very, very low.
So we're enabling them to do more damage over the long.
So I would really like to try to wrap this up. Let's
I have
just
one quick question.
Two quick
question.
comments. If our speakers need to go, I know that there's some additional comments that council members will want to make, but
Lori Zoccolo again, Maple Road. My question though is for City Council. Is this council going to commit to have first reading on this subject no later than September?
I'll talk about timelines in a little bit.
Quick question. Is there a cost effectiveness difference between sterilizing a buck and a doe? And effectiveness in the long term?
Well, effectiveness would be lower. Cost, at the end of the day, the physical, the same drugs, the same surgery, right? So probably that cost is not the same, but the number that you're going to have to do would probably be higher, but the problem's going to have access. So the 90%, plus that John talks about is on the female side. It's probably close to 100% on the bucks, and it's still not going to be 100% because of that movement that comes in and out. So how do you, I always say the center is the most impacted, right? But the further you get out, the less those.
I don't know what you mean by the center. And
so like if we said that Cleveland Heights was going to do sterilization of bucks, right? And we were going to castrate them, and that was the solution. The center at City Hall here is going to have the most benefit because as we get further out, we're still going to have deer coming and going. But if we build that circle, that ring out further, and we're still doing all of those bucks, then the center still gets the most benefit, and it's going to have less of those bucks coming in. Okay. So the feasibility of doing the bucks in a situation where you got deer coming and going is almost not even thinkable. If you're in a closed situation like an island or a fenced-in compound, good. Then you have that ability at your hands.
Yeah, because each doe you're treating, you are technically reducing that by 2 for every animal. Every buck you're treating, it doesn't matter because there's another buck that can impregnate then multiple females. So you have to get almost 100% of the bucks. Because those are still capable of each having, 2 on
do you
average.
think it might be a good idea maybe to get some bucks as well as just going after the does
But my point
to
is,
be more effective?
you treat one buck, all those other bucks can still.
Well, all the other does can still reproduce.
Well, I would have to show. That's why.
It's a math problem.
But if you look at most
I don't, do you?
Yeah, you want to go outside?
Would you explain that?
Yeah, why don't we go outside?
Okay.
Okay, thank you, everybody, for your comments. I would like to talk a little bit about some timeframes. We passed our budget. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, John, for being here. So some people are interested in timeframes. And again, keep in mind, this council has not made any kind of decisions, nor has the administration. There is active research going on. I believe the administration has spoken to all the partners that help South Euclid and Shaker and Beechwood. So they're pretty knee deep into this. This is something that doesn't really need to be happening by council. I mean, keep in mind, we legislate, we allocate money. It's on the back of the administration to do the work. I mean, that's the way our new mayoral system works. So getting an administration that is supportive of this, that we have right now, is very helpful. We didn't have that before. This will likely be included in the budget if we're going to proceed. It is also likely that it'll begin in January, which is when the new budget starts, which is in the height of the time when you would be actively doing deer management. This, again, there's a lot of ifs here. There's a lot of research that still has to get done, decisions on whether or not you hold on sterilization for a year. Those have not been made yet. I think from what we're hearing, the recommendation is call first, a deal with sterilization later. We are getting pricing from vendors. Again, these are the people that have worked with South Euclid, Shaker, and Beechwood. We may have a much more active relationship with them. That means we're talking to other cities. So I can't make any promises. So I can't say that we're going to have something as a first reading when it may just be an issue that all we're doing is allocating money for a budget. There might have to be some legislation that has to get passed. I mean, we've talked to the law department about that. So there's a lot of research that's actually going on right now. Research that needs to get done to bring back to council so we can make a decision. And I think that's where we're at. I believe some council members had some statements, and let's start with Gail Larson, who's been very active on this.
Yes, and I think when we talk about the fact that you haven't seen anything happening, Councilor Posh and I are committed to seeing something happening. And that's why we've been able and happy to work with the administration on this. I would like to say a couple of things about the progress that we've gone through to get to this point this evening. First of all, thank you all for coming. We have collected data, including the survey of residents regarding their experiences with our deer herd, the frequency of deer vehicle crashes, the count of how many deer carcasses are removed, and a deer count. This is the second public hearing we've held on this initiative because the Public Safety and Health Committee and all of council are committed to transparency and obtaining residents' input as we work with the administration to establish a deer management program to start in 2027 as our goal. We have too many deer in Cleveland Heights that are getting hit by cars. We have too many deer in Cleveland Heights that are destroying gardens in our neighborhoods. Deer carry diseases and ticks. Some of the deer in our herd are sick. Deer are injured on our backyard fences. The majority of the engaged residents during both public hearings and the emails and calls we are getting want to see the herd numbers reduced. And for all of these reasons, I am very happy Mayor Petrus and City Administrator Reese are supportive of our efforts to gather information and data, and I will be supportive of a budget line item in 2027 that will fund a deer management plan that starts early in 2027.
Thank you, Kara.
I have a question for Jeff, and thanks for coming out, and also for all the residents for making the time to come out and have your voices heard. So we've talked somewhat about Lyme disease, but in terms of overpopulation of an animal herd, there can also be diseases associated with overpopulation. So are we seeing anything like that? Are we seeing chronic wasting disease in this population, or any other issues associated with overpopulation?
So deer, we used to, back in the days, if we had a dead deer and it was a suspicious thing, we would send it off to the lab and get a full autopsy, called a necropsy on wildlife, but done on the deer to find out why it died. After years of doing that, we learned that deer get lots of things. And so we stopped doing that anymore because it was wasn't really providing us any beneficial knowledge moving forward. That being said, there are some diseases that we do kind of still look for, and chronic wasting disease is one that we test for, and then Cleveland Metro Parks and oftentimes the Cuyahoga Valley National Park also test their deer for it as well. So we are watching for that. EHD is another disease that we watch for. It would be of concern if we did get it in an area like Cleveland Heights where you have higher deer densities. You're going to have a lot more deer die. The service department is going to be very taxed with going and picking up dead deer when we get that, because it hits the deer hard, and you do get a large die-off typically with that. Other than that, the only other disease that we kind of, I don't want to say watch for, but that I see, and I can't say that it is something that is tied to density, but a deer disease or wildlife disease 101 tells me it is I have seen an increase in the number of pneumonia cases with deer. And I gotta believe it has to do at some level with density. So at the end of the day, all of those diseases are transmissible from within having a large deer population would be a negative to all of those diseases and those situations with the deer. So now, that being said, the comment was made that, the deer don't look healthy. I've only one time in my career seen starvation and the point of deer dying because of being unhealthy. That was in the national park in the early 2000s when deer densities were astronomical there. In general, we don't see that, even in municipalities, because it goes back to John's, like, they have a lot of food, they're eating a lot, they are not going through those stressors. So we don't generally see, deer being sick or unhealthy, but obviously, just like people, deer get sick and you can have individual situations. And if you have, I'll use pneumonia as an example, and you have a deer with pneumonia that's getting impacted by that, and it's with 3, 4, 5 other deer, higher chance that those other deer are going to pick that up, and you'll have a collective in an area. So maybe that one property had a situation or has a situation going on.
Great, thanks. I won't go on at length, but my general understanding of this is not as a case of humans moving into the natural habitat and creating this problem, but us creating the environment for deer to come into and to overpopulate. And considering that this is anything but a natural situation, a natural environment for the deer, I think the responsible action is to actively manage the issue. And so I'm in favor of moving forward with some of the plans that have been outlined tonight.
Doing nothing is not an option at this point. The prior mayor was not in favor of our doing any deer management, and we have a new mayor that's in favor of taking some action, as I believe the majority of city council is also in favor of doing that. The one thing that if we end up contracting with sharpshooters, I would support allowing private individuals to contract with that sharpshooter to remove deer from their property. I think we need to go that extra step, because I know if I had deer bedding in my yard, I would want them removed. And I think we need to give property owners the option to do that and just not leave removal to the public lands.
I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead.
So I understand your point, and I was actually going to comment that in our yard, the culling that's been suggested will be living. But if something like that were adopted, I think that the city should insist that surrounding neighbors agree to it.
I agree.
I grew up as a hunter with high-powered rifles, and the number of people who thought that a wooden fence was going to stop a deer got sick was just nuts. So I think it would be wrong for the city to allow an individual homeowner to let a sharpshooter fire a firearm in their yard without having some recognition of the rights of the immediate neighbors.
Well, that's a discussion worth having, as well as, what's the minimum size of the lot? Because there's some neighborhoods where it wouldn't be appropriate. There are others, like your neighborhood, where you have larger lots, it would be appropriate. We didn't have in at this hearing the company that contracts with Shaker that came to the last presentation, and they're retired police officers, they're sharpshooters. I think they use a suppressed rifle, so you're not even typically aware. It's done at night, so you're not even aware that this is going on, and certainly safety would be paramount. Hunting is not something that I would ever be in favor of in this city, but these are trained sharpshooters, and they're only doing it where it can safely be done. I'm willing to have the discussion about whether you should get your adjoining property owners to have to agree, but again, depending on the size, if you've got an acre-sized lot, and you have a neighbor that, if one neighbor can put the kibosh on your ability to have deer removed that are nesting in your yard, I don't know about that. I wouldn't be in favor of it. Yeah, certainly the notification to people that it's going on, but do you want one of your neighbors to be able to I'm just speaking hypothetically, to object to a severe nuisance that you have going on in your yard, particularly if that's a neighbor that's feeding deer next to you and has the salt lick and is going to say no? Yeah.
So this is a general rule. Nobody in our neighborhood does anything that they think is going to irritate their neighbors, because we all collectively live in a neighborhood. And so people make compromises. One point I would say, I don't know if this would be accepted by the people who are experts, but you can also dart a deer, put it down, and then kill it. You don't have to fire a bullet that can cross property lines.
Yeah, and
there are ways around the problem. Anyway, I don't want to decide it's a really complicated issue. I just want to voice the opinion that I would sort of join the folks that would recoil at the idea of having sharpshooters in yards. And an acre-sized property is not very big for a rifle.
Thank you. I mean, I think you can see that there's a lot of nuance in all of this.
Liability, obviously.
And a lot of concern, which is, I think, why we're taking this on. From my perspective, I am worried about the carrying capacity of a herd. I do not want to see the deer go away. But I think we've gotten to a point, and I think we've been told by ODNR, we're at a tipping point. And if we delay, what does that do? And let's say we do nothing, like nothing was done in the last 4 years. That essentially doubles the population plus of the deer herd that we have right now. You know, is that over? Too much deer? I mean, I know that there's areas in this community that the residents refer to as being deforested. I believe she was English. She was a director of vice president of horticulture at the Holden Arboretum. She lived in Cleveland Heights. She was the one that first approached me and said, this is something that you need to look at. She was concerned that our city was being deforested or starting to. So, I mean, I think these are concerns, and these are concerns why we're bringing it up. I'm not sure we could wait. And that's why I think we've brought some experts in here. And I think we've got some smart people that are looking at data to make a decision. And I think that's where we need to be. I have one final thing to say. Most of you know my age. I'm 65. I'm one of the older guys in the room. A comment was mentioned that, gee whiz, look at what the young people want. And what sort of observation, not that I can like see everybody's age on their forehead here, but two very young people, probably the youngest people in the room, came up and they had passionate things to say. I mean, we do have to think about our youth. And this is where, you know, we do have to think about others when you're a council member. I mean, what does it mean to them? Even though you may feel strongly about something else, you really need to try to put your feet in someone else's shoes the best you possibly can. And I think that's what we're all trying to do here. And I just wanted to, I mean, for me, that felt like the elephant in the room tonight. And I'm really glad that you guys all came out here and spoke. And I want to thank you. And take the survey if you already haven't. So this meeting's adjourned. Thank you.